Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Connor. I'm a science fiction, political, and philosophy nerd, a Marine Corps and law enforcement veteran. I am a Never Trump Republican. I am a part of the Valor Media Network. I go into the alternative media to find the worst actors in the field and criticize their arguments, criticize their personalities, and also debate them on occasion. What I have for you today is a special vial, a special shot of autism. That might be ableist. Sorry to the autistic people in chat. I parasocially love you. But a special shot of schizophrenia. And it's the debate over the woke right. And effectively, what's being argued is that there are segments of the right that use the argumentation of the far left in order to achieve Christian nationalist and dissident right-wing ideas. There are people who deny this exists as a concept. And those people typically are the ones who are being accused of being woke right. So without further ado, we're going to watch Andrew Wilson and Misfit Patriot, who are both right-wing actors, talk about the phenomena and see whether or not it's real. True.
Okay, so they don't reject him as
atheists believe that Jesus was a real person, so they don't reject him?
Sure, they do. They're no, here. Look, we're
Sorry, I'm pausing very early. This is Andrew Wilson's entire shtick, by the way. Is just being super confident, and when his opponent says something that he thinks is silly, he just laughs at them to make them feel like a moron. So the whole point is just call him out on it, you know?
We're talking about two different things, okay? You're saying it in a negative connotation.
Well, it's because
I've never look. I didn't watch any of your debates. I didn't realize how much of a fucking cartoon character you are, and how much you self fucking masturbate on these debates. You literally anytime you
yes, give me the cope, yes, give me the cope, yes, yes.
Finish it up, boys.
Anytime you make a point, you have this out of body experience where you literally you have a fucking. No,
I mean, I've heard some stupid shit before,
but look at how awesome I am. Dude, do you have a real job? Like, do you have a job, like, do you have a 9-to-5?
Yeah, you know, I'm like you. I saw some of your like garbage carpentry. I was a robotics mechanic.
Carpentry? Yeah, no. Bro,
all right, gentlemen.
The fact that you said that proves that you didn't look at my work. But I'm asking, do you have a real job, or do you just smoke and talk to fucking hookers online all day?
Right now I'm smoking and talking to someone way less smart than the hookers I talk to.
Oh boy! All right, gentlemen. Do we want to? We can ad hom and throw mud at each other, or we can get back to the topic.
It's just hilarious. He's a fucking cartoon character.
I don't know. You're the one who seems to be seething pretty hard right now, bro.
I'm not, man.
You seem very upset.
You just had a fucking another meltdown for the 15th.
You mean I laughed at your stupidity when you said that it's not?
Okay, guys, let's structure it. Okay, let's do intros. Good God! All right, here we go. Sorry, I'm getting to the actual intro so we can get into the debate. So apparently this is Raging Tomato. I've seen her a whole bunch hosting new debates. You know, if she's throwing down on panel scenes, I'll be happy to get on the panel scene. This is Andrew Wilson, formerly known as Big Papa Fascist. He's a Christian nationalist. He wants to institute a Christian theocracy in the United States of America. This is Misfit Patriot. I've seen him going semi-viral on Twitter for fighting for the Zionist cause. So I think he's a Christian Zionist, but he's still a conservative. And so that's kind of the setup for whether or not the woke right exists.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I am Sarah, the Raging Tomato, bringing to you live another debate this evening. I've got Andrew Wilson from The Crucible and the Misfit Patriot, bringing to you the question of, well, the statement more so, there is no woke right. Andrew, would you like to start with your opening statement, please?
Thank God.
Yeah, usually I write a pretty elongated opening statement so I can cover each individual point. I didn't this time because my opponent's a troll cow by his own admission. So the thing is I'll just affirm this very simply. The woke right's completely made up and fucking nonsense. It's postulated by James Lindsay. It means absolutely nothing. My opponent won't even have a definition of what it is. If he does have a definition of what it is, it won't be consistent and it won't make any sense. And that would be the end of the debate. That's my entire opening statement.
Thank you, Andrew. Misfit, to you.
Well, based off of this, I might already reach out to Andrew Wilson. The definition is actually quite clear from James Lindsay's perspective. James Lindsay's argumentation is that there was all this nefarious behavior we were calling out on the left, and those behaviors included identity politics, draconian and advocacy for draconian and authoritarian policy, and browbeating anyone who didn't get in line with the heterodoxy. And so those are like three things right there that we plenty of people objected to about the far left. Now, when it comes to the far right with Christian nationalists and dissident right folk, they are doing the same thing. They are absolutely advocating for authoritarian and draconian policy. They absolutely have a cult of personality around Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, and they will browbeat you for being insufficiently loyal to it. And I forget my third point because I'm just waking up and getting my caffeine. But effectively, and then also it's an identitarian movement. So the identity changes based off of who you're talking to. If you're talking about the Wignats or Ethnonats, then the Wignats and the Ethnonats are 100%, going to use white identity as the cornerstone of what they think they're going to advocate for in politics. But if you're talking to a Christian nationalist, then it's going to be Christian theocracy. So it is an identitarian movement. So I don't know. I think that's a perfectly viable definition. And the fact that Andrew Wilson is denying that, I think, is him being obtuse.
It's actually funny that he did that because this time I did write a long opening statement. And before we get into that, I'm going to preface it with this is not a personal attack against, and there's no children or anything in here. I'm not trying to break any rules, but I'm going to tie in some personal things about Andrew. And I am.
Why Misfit Patriot? Why would you tie in personal things about Andrew? Why wouldn't you just go for the definition?
I do have a definition of what woke right is. What woke right is, I'm going to give the short version because James Lindsay's long, sort of, antiquated version, it gets very confusing. Woke right is people who voted for Donald Trump but act like the woke left, right? It's that.
Right, voted for Donald Trump, but.
Right, is people who voted for Donald Trump but act like the woke left, right?
Okay, fair enough. Voted for Donald Trump but act like the woke left. Okay.
It's that simple, okay? It's identity politics. It's a victim mentality. It's making everything about race. I have a real sort of I guess you could call it super list of tenets of the woke right, with identity politics, moral absolutism, a view of liberty, truth, and role of the state, tactics and coercion, vision, reform versus revolution, et cetera, et cetera. So I can go against any of Andrew's points with sort of the James Lindsay educational arguments, but let's go through my long opening statement that I read because this time I took it
Yeah. Okay.
seriously, and I prepared for it, like Andrew said last time. Okay, so I'm not really here to debate because, to be honest, Andrew doesn't really debate in good faith. Andrew plans to manipulate the conversation using narcissistic abuse techniques and framing tactics.
Ew. Bruh, why? Sorry, I can't cover this up for you.
To try to make me.
Oh, that was a retainer. I thought he was picking food out of his teeth. Okay, good God. Who's the lady in the corner? It's Sarah the Raging Tomato. She's hosting panels now, so she's effectively the new Crucible. There was another show that went straight into Fed posting Nazi stuff, where they were just posting stuff all the time. I forget who they were, but they were so crazy that they got banned off of every platform. So hopefully Raging Tomato actually keeps terms of service and becomes a decent right-wing debate platform.
It looks stupid, and that's not really a debate. That's a show. That's what Andrew does. He puts on a show. That being said, I will treat this seriously, more seriously than last time, because now I know how he operates. The reason I'm the best equipped for this woke right debate is because the woke right attacks me constantly, many of whom follow and support Andrew. Because I'm able to provide this unique insight as to why Andrew himself is woke right adjacent, and I say adjacent because he displays some of the tenets of woke right, but not all. For instance, he doesn't really have a victim mentality. I wouldn't put him in that category. He doesn't blame the Jews for all of his problems. Right. But one thing he does engage in is coercion and exclusion tactics, and that's a tenet of the woke left and the woke right. It's one of the tools Andrew uses to dunk on people he disagrees with. Him and his mob of simp followers that he probably coordinates with in Discord servers or some other form of communication. They'll artificially boost his side of the argument while crushing the opposition with ratios. He brags about his engagement and status constantly and how he's going to own people, which means the sycophants are about to attack whoever he talks about. Even if I beat him on the merits of the debate with my arguments, he'll claim victory and I'll hear nonstop from the mob about how Andrew owned you.
Dude, nobody cares. Okay. This is Twitch and YouTube Politics 101, where a lot of people like to call out their opponent's line of argumentation without actually just simply contending with the debate, simply contending with the arguments. You can if you have the confidence, this is my genuine advice to people who like the debate scene and maybe want to participate in the debate scene. Let the arguments land where they're going to land, okay? A lot of people simply follow whoever is most confident. A lot of people on Twitch and YouTube Politics do that, but they have an IQ of 80. So you probably, everybody in my IQ, or everybody in my chat has a 3,000 IQ. So even though we're a smaller community, just by being here and having your pristine taste in content, you are already more intelligent than everybody else that's in the scene. What other people do is they pretend to be vastly more confident and more correct than they are, but their argumentation and their logic is dog shit, right? And so Misfit Patriot is trying to preempt Andrew's grandstanding and being confident and, you know, basically declaring victory when he hasn't actually won victory, because that plays great to people with an 80 IQ. But the truth is that you're never going to win the people over with an 80 IQ. And for the people who have higher than an 80 IQ, you're losing them because you care more about the optics of the debate and whether or not you won rather than the argumentation. Focus on the argumentation, focus on the debate, focus on your points, and then let the chips fall where they may. That's my genuine advice for being in the debate scene, is don't worry about what the audience is going to do, or you're going to drive yourself crazy and you're actually going to look worse by being dumb. Chase says, my IQ is 69,420 to be clear. Exactly. Chase is the smartest amongst us.
Internet hero, some hooker that their internet hero yelled at. It's creating more filth online, not less. To break down his views on patriarchy, his wife has the same job he does. She argues with people on the internet from her soapbox of superiority, but she's not a stay-at-home mom or trad wife. She's an author. She's a podcaster. She monetizes her presence on the internet. She makes money. She files taxes. She's basically a strong, independent woman. Every moment she's on her phone arguing on the internet, she's a hypocrite. She's Andrew's business partner, and that's a very progressive relationship, if you ask me. She promotes all this stuff online, and for somebody who claims they want a patriarchal society, him and her both agree that women apparently should talk back to men, because she talks back to men all the time on his behalf. So that's a grift. They fooled all of you. Andrew and his business partner don't want to create a better society based on traditional values. They saw a market where they could capitalize off it. They're brand developers. His brand is shock value, and this is clear to anybody with half a brain. And if you added up all of his fans, you'd fall short of that intellectual mark. So to throw his Christianity, his patriarchal views back at him with those.
Sorry, what I'm laughing at is everybody is kind of commenting like, hey, I think this intro is kind of weak, but they're also saying that this dude's a Pennsylvania 10, where let's be real. Let's just be real. Let's call a spade, okay? He's got muscles. He's a carpenter. His house looks nice. You know, it's very middle income, but it looks like a nice house. I think these are granite or marble countertops. He's got a French door fridge. You know, he's got very, very, very blue eyes, and he has a very well-kempt beard. Right? So, yeah, this is a Pennsylvania 10. So, line of argumentation, everything that's going on so far, kind of not the strongest opening that I've ever seen, especially in the Twitch and YouTube political debate scene. But brother is a Pennsylvania 7.5. He needs overalls to be a 10. Okay. So basically all we've done so far, or at least all my chat's done so far, is talked about how hot Misfit Patriot is.
To tenets of woke. What he's doing is virtue signaling, and it's the opposite of Christianity. Jesus at the well, rebuking the woman with the five husbands, didn't call her a retard. He said, God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and truth. Sorry, I just woke up. I'm having a hard time reading.
Yeah, we noticed, bud. You're doing your best. I might fast forward you in a second. Grass your Chechabon for the 20 says, somehow out of all of Destiny orbiters, Andrew Wilson is the one who survived. I mean, yeah, and is thriving by calling promiscuous women dumb on the internet. This dude. All right, so just to describe it, Andrew Wilson was a schizo far-right debater for a long time, and he had a show, The Crucible, which I did enjoy. It's very good because he had access to a lot of schizo dissident right-wing creators, and so he made really spicy shows for a really long time. But the way that he popped off algorithmically is he started going on the Whatever podcast as a heel, and he just started, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Whatever podcast, it's a show where Instagram and Californian Los Angeles bimbos, I guess is the way to say it, go and they argue with men who just call them pieces of garbage for like 3 hours. And it's incredibly popular content. And so Andrew Wilson became a wrestling heel on that show where that was his role. And he was so good at it. He was so good at being mean to women that they started having him video call from home just so he could bully random women. And so as a result, he went from a few hundred live viewers to, I don't know, 5,000 live viewers, which is very respectable from a live streaming perspective. And he probably makes tens of thousands of dollars per month now doing that, right? Yeah, it's essentially hate pornography, Harmonic Fox says. Yeah, exactly. And so that's why he's popped off. That's why he's like a miniature star in the dissident right, is because he can bully women. Now, Misfit Patriot, like I said, I've seen him pop off on Twitter a few times, but besides that, I don't know what his social media presence is like. But the truth is that this is in the debate scene. This is my genuine advice if you're getting into the debate scene. In, out, okay? In, out. You got to make your arguments and get out, okay? So Misfit Patriot should say, the short definition is there are those people who are a part of the right who voted for Donald Trump, who are adopting all the behaviors of the left. I think that Andrew Wilson, while he pretends to be a conservative, is actually a grifter. He has a progressive relationship with his wife. He has a progressive relationship with the world. He bullies whores on the internet, and I think that he's effectively here just to capitalize on the space. I don't think he has any genuinely held beliefs. Misfit Patriot is going to talk for another 2 to 3 minutes. I guarantee you that I covered 90% of what he said in 30 seconds. And so if you want to be in the debate space, if you want to be in the debate space, if you want to be aggressive, then you can't have 10-minute rants. You need to go, this is my point, F you, move on, right?
Okay.
He approached her with love and kindness. He didn't mock and shame the adulteress in the street either. He didn't laugh at her when he said he was without sin, go and cast the first stone. He showed her mercy and love. I don't see any Christian values when I look at Andrew. I see a bully who thinks he's God's gift to the internet. The only thing smart about him and his ability to fool people into thinking he's something he's not. He's a grifter. You're all his mark. No matter what we discuss over the next couple hours,
we get it.
So now we can.
I believe both panelists will be joining us for open panel, as far as I'm aware of. Outside of that, gentlemen, I leave the floor open to you.
So I just quick question. So you think my audience is really fucking stupid?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, got it. So your idea is that they're all marks and that they're so fucking stupid that I'm just able to dupe them at a moment's notice.
You're very clever at tricking stupid people into thinking you're smarter than you are because of the way that you talk and use framing tactics. That's what I believe.
You know what I say my IQ is?
Don't give a shit.
Yeah, I say it's average. You know why? Because it's average.
Sure.
I don't.
Oh, wow. I thought Andrew Wilson was a true believer. I think he's a true believer. Sorry if I made that unclear. I don't want to be clipped out of context. So Misfit Patriot is calling him you know, a grifter or whatever. I don't think Andrew Wilson is a grifter at all. He's been arguing Christian nationalist, giga conservative perspectives ever since I've known him. He hasn't changed. He hasn't wavered. He's had the same principles for 2 or 3 years. There are plenty of people who hate him. He didn't buckle under the pressure of that hatred, and he's doubled or tripled down. I think there's a hyperbolic element to his personality, and I think that his line of argumentation oftentimes boils down to appealing to, I don't know if ontological is the right word, but effectively he appeals to a worldview that he feels like he has followed a logic chain to build up to the point that you cannot assail any part of his logic chain in order to break it from his perspective. And so as a result, he argues with supreme confidence. Now, that doesn't mean that I think he's correct. There's a thing about validity versus soundness. So if I remember correctly, a argument being a valid versus sound. So somebody needs to correct me. I'm going to Google it real quick just so I don't misuse you. But one of them, valid versus sound. In the context of arguments, valid refers to the structure or form of an argument, meaning that the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Sound refers to both the validity of the argument and the truth of its premises. So you can have a valid argument, meaning that you constructed a logic chain that, if true, means that it is your line of argumentation makes sense, whereas soundness, not only are your arguments valid, meaning that if the logic chain flows, then your line of argumentation is correct, but also soundness means that your argumentation, each premise is also true. And so I think that in Andrew's opinion, he thinks that not only are his arguments valid, they're also sound. Whereas I think that his arguments might be logically valid, but that does not mean that they're sound. And so that's oftentimes what we fight about whenever we talk.
I think I'm incredibly intelligent.
I don't think you're stupid. I think you're.
I just think I'm much more intelligent than you are. Now, to the debate itself, you bring up there's a couple like hater remarks that I don't mind going through before we get into this. So I've heard this criticism a lot. Should I do debates against leftists, prominent leftists like Destiny?
I wouldn't. I would say that comparing Destiny to an OnlyFans girl is a false equivalency. But yeah, sure.
Okay. Is it not necessarily true that if I do debates with creators like Destiny, because I have a large platform, that he's probably going to peel off a good portion of my audience, or at least some portion of my audience, and vice versa?
Well, yeah, I think I see what you're doing. Like, you're going to be promoting the OnlyFans girls, and you're going to be getting them more business.
No. Just answer my question, dude. Is it true?
Yes, it's true that Destiny may get viewers because you debate him.
Do you think that he engages in debates with large, prominent right-wingers like myself because he thinks that he'll be able to peel off portions of that audience for himself?
I don't know why, but maybe.
I mean, that probably follows, right?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons.
So by your logic, should I not debate with large, prominent leftists because there's a possibility that they can peel off some of my audience?
It's a false equivalency.
Can you answer my question?
Yes, you should.
Yes, I should. Okay. So then if that's the case, isn't it the case then that the types of people who would gravitate towards Destiny, who are in my audience, right? Those types of people would be looking for somebody like that anyway. That just because I'm there to rebuke them or to debate with their ideas does not mean I endorse their ideas or endorse what it is that they're doing, right?
Again, a false equivalency.
What's the false equivalency?
This is the.
Yeah, I also don't like the call out of random debate terms, okay? So Grassroots Hegemon says, I also don't think he's correct, but if you take Andrew's moral framework in, then it's solid on its own basis. They are valid in his context, but don't butt heads well with reality. I agree. I don't think that, same thing with Nick Fuentes. I don't think Christian nationalism is going to be, I don't think we're going to have a Christian theocracy in the United States in the next century. I don't think we're going to have it in the next millennia. I think the Constitution is so robust and so difficult to amend that we are not going to be repealing the First Amendment. I think anybody who tries to repeal the First Amendment will effectively guarantee their own political downfall. It's the same thing with Trump right now. If he runs for a third term, there will be riots, there will be protests, there will be assassination attempts, because despite everybody dogging the Republic of the United States, they actually, you know, it's a decent framework in which free people can cooperate and survive. And so, yeah, you can chip away at the framework, but if you attack the core of its structure, I think you're inviting civil war unironically, or at least like a guerrilla insurgency. So I don't think we're going to have a Christian theocracy anytime in the next millennia. I think this is a pipe dream. I think it appeals to dissidents within the right wing who want to have their own special little ideological project. I don't think they're serious. Now, that being said, he's still speaking to tens of thousands of young men, radicalizes them, and makes them think that Christian theocracy is the solution. So that's, unfortunate that they, within their framework, they can have a built up structure, but I don't think that built up structure is going to help them. Andrew's afraid of losing viewers to Destiny. What does that say about his audience? Lol. Well, I don't think he's saying that. I think he's arguing with Misfit Patriot over Misfit Patriot attacked Andrew Wilson for talking to OnlyFans girls, effectively popularizing their content. That's a criticism of the Whatever podcast, is that as much as they talk about how bad sex work is and the modern dating scene is bad and these Instagram girls are dumb and this, that, the other, what ends up happening, all the Instagram girls and the OnlyFans girls say this, is despite being bullied on the show, what happens is a substantive amount of men come over to their OnlyFans channels and their Instagram profiles. And so as a result, going on to the Whatever podcast to get bullied is a financial and clout boost to their careers, whereas you think it would be negative because they're getting bullied, right? So what Misfit Patriot is pointing out is that Andrew Wilson is knowingly participating in that dynamic where he's popularizing OnlyFans girls and making their careers more viable, not less. So Andrew Wilson is making an argument, well, if I argue with Destiny, I'm effectively popularizing Destiny, so does that mean that I should stop debating Destiny? So Misfit Patriot, if he's being intellectually honest, he's going to say, no, I want you to be in that space in order to fight people, in order to change their minds about things. And then Andrew Wilson is going to say, lol, got ya, because the logic follows for the OnlyFans girls as well. Just because they increase in popularity in general doesn't mean that I don't break off a few towards my line of argumentation. K-Soko says, I missed that. But yeah, it's my fault. I fast forwarded it because Misfit Patriot was taking a long time to get to it. So that's not your fault. That's my fault. Okay. I fast forwarded past him making that point. I actually just inferred that based off of the personal attacks against Andrew Wilson. Grassroots Hegemon says, I don't know. I'm a weird freak who listens to both Andrew Wilson and Destiny and think they are both disgusting freaks. Well, true centrism, huh? So Civil War. I knew time on Tim Pool would change you. No, John. I'm just saying that we already had assassination attempts against Trump this time around. You think that if he runs for a third term in violation of the Constitution and just tries to strong arm it, there's not going to be assassination attempts and militia warfare in the United States? I'm not going to Fed post about it, but let's just say that I would be supportive of the militias that support the Constitution of the United States. Sorry, I'm going to read one more chat and get back into the content. Ironside says, I'm not sure there's a comparison between Destiny and OnlyFans girls since people really aren't going to that for their opinions. I'm with you. And if Misfit Patriot is smart enough, he'll make that distinction.
These are the framing tactics that you use, right? You create a false equivalency, then ask a bunch of
questions. What's the false equivalency?
Wouldn't you agree?
What's the false equivalency?
Destiny is not promoting.
No, he's way worse. He's way worse than an OnlyFans girl. Way worse than an OnlyFans girl.
Sure.
Right?
So I just said if Misfit Patriot is smart, he's going to make the differentiation, and then he immediately does. And then Andrew Wilson is already ready for our line of argumentation, saying that Destiny is actually worse than OnlyFans girls. That's impressive. That was a quick series of chess moves. If we were on a chess timer, we would have made a move and hit the timer, and then Andrew Wilson would have made a move and hit the timer immediately. Let's see how the argumentation develops.
But you're the Christian that is promoting the.
How am I promoting it? Show me the promotion.
Well, because these girls would not be on the internet promoting their.
I don't think Destiny would be on the internet promoting it if he had no viewers either. So the thing is like me engaging with the ideology.
I would argue that his views, which I disagree with, are not as dangerous as pornography.
Way more dangerous. The guys like him are the guys who push it everywhere in all corners. They're the guys, in fact, who have actual Democrat money pouring into their channels. And let me give you an example of one such organization which does this. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Brianna Wu is a prominent leftist.
Hold on. This is something that I'm going to be able to speak to. I'm ready when you are, Berween, specifically this afternoon. If you want to catch up. This is reminding me that I was supposed to talk to Destiny about Israel-Palestine this week. But let's see what he says about PV, and then I'll explain it better.
Inside of these spheres, created a left-wing organization, which included Destiny, Vosh, a whole bunch of other creators. They bought up Twitch politics in order to push the message of degeneracy. They were going on every conservative platform they possibly could to get that message out. It was the fact that guys like me were there to completely eviscerate their ideologies that entire endeavor failed, right? What you're at...
No, he's giving himself a little bit too much credit. Okay. So PV, Progressive Victory, was a Democratic organization run. I'm just going to be very transparent because I think it's necessary for people to understand what's actually going on. PV was an organization started by Sam Drismala, and Sam had the foresight to understand that alternative media can be utilized in order to achieve mainstream political results. And so what he did, and I'll criticize Brianna a little bit, still like Brianna, still friendly with Brianna, etc., is Brianna thought that the way to utilize the alternative media space is to create a coalition of anti-Trump creators who would then not only create content within their own spheres, but would collaborate in order to translate that audience into real-world action like canvassing operations. Now, the truth is that Destiny and Vosh dwarf every other anti-Trump creator besides Hassan Piker by a factor of like 100 or 1,000. So the truth is that, in my opinion, PV could have fired 90%, including me, of the creators that they worked with, and they could have worked with Destiny and Vosh and achieved the same result. Now, Destiny, I would say, was 70% of the energy in PV, and I would say that Vosh was 30% of the energy of PV. And they translated that into a year and a half of canvassing operations, and they translated that into 3 canvassing events. So at each canvassing event, I think Vosh got 200 volunteers to show up to canvass. I think that Destiny got 300 volunteers to show up to 2 separate events, and it was like in Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and New York. And they knocked on a whole bunch of doors in order to get Democrats registered and notify them of the elections and this, that, the other. And I think each event got around 40,000 to 50,000 doors knocked. So that's 150,000 people that, knocked on doors and volunteered and all that kind of stuff. Then Stephen had substantive amounts of his community. I think it was like around a dozen people who lived in canvassing houses. They were volunteers, but they had their food, shelter, water, all that stuff paid for, and they got a per diem, and they knocked on doors every single day, and they also did like phone banking volunteer events. So cumulatively, through all of those efforts, they got 1.6 million voter contacts. How many people registered to vote? How many people were going to vote Republican that voted Democrat? I have no idea, right? But 1.6 million people were contacted over a year and a half through that effort. So Andrew Wilson kind of positioning it, obviously that wasn't enough, right? Let's say that all 1.6 million people were going to vote Republican and then they voted Democrat instead, which is not what happened, right? Because there's a lot of noise in the data. But let's say that happened. That would not have been enough to win the election, right? So Andrew Wilson saying, oh, I foiled PV by having these debates and destroying their creators in the marketplace of ideas. I foiled PV's mission. That's not true, right? So the Gon says, "The fucks up grilled hard ass." I don't know what you mean by that, but we are the Grillaban. We are Grill Moss. We are somebody came up with like a terrorist organization combined with Grill yesterday. That was really funny. I think I wrote it down. Grill Hotism. Well, welcome to Counterpoints. We are grill hotists, which means that we're normie centrists who want to grill on the weekends. So, Commander Haircut says Hassan coded viewers participating in the electoral system. Yeah, unironically. So anyways, so I just wanted to say that I think Andrew Wilson's statement of the danger of Brianna Wu and Progressive Victory is overstated. And then I think his effect on PV's mission is overstated.
What you're actually saying to me here is that because I go on a show where these women's views would be completely fucking unchallenged if I didn't, that would be better to leave them there unopposed rather than go on there, because there's a possibility that some people could peel off towards that ideology.
So what you're saying is that a liberal espousing their own views in a respectful debate is the same thing as a hooker.
You think that
I'm surprised Andrew Wilson didn't just say yes.
Destiny debates respectfully?
I don't think you do. So I think.
Yeah. Do you think he does? He didn't. No,
I don't.
No, he doesn't. And the thing is that if you had ever watched a single episode of whatever, don't lie, you haven't.
No,
because otherwise you would know.
Well, I don't.
That's exactly right.
No,
otherwise, you would know that these debates actually are respectful until the other position becomes disrespectful, begins personal attacks, begins things like this. Now, what I engage in is a de-escalation tactic. No, it's a de-escalation tactic. So oftentimes if somebody's highly insulting towards you, if you hit back, it'll de-escalate what's going on. It doesn't escalate it further.
They're hookers. Right?
Yeah.
They're
Do you think that because you're a hooker, that means you're stupid? Do you think that these hookers with college degrees who come out of these universities, they have degrees in psychology, philosophy, they have degrees in all kinds of shit?
Hold on. Do you think that G's? I watched a clip of you. Now I never watched the full episode, but I've seen plenty of clips. Right? Mm-hmm. Do you think that Jesus would have called a girl a retard and done the like? Are you?
You call people retards all the time.
I am not you. I'm.
Haircut Commander / Commander Haircut. You know, I'm going to apologize. I disavow this ableist language, okay? But I think that there's a steel man here. I don't know if Andrew Wilson's going to make it, that Jesus was vicious with some people. So obviously Jesus said, turn the other cheek. He who is without sin cast the first stone. There was the Sermon on the Mount. He said, what was it? Like, do unto others as, you want them to do unto you. There's a whole bunch of semi-pacifistic language in Christianity, but there also is warrior language as well. Like, I didn't come to bring the something, but I came to bring the sword. I'm going to turn brothers against brothers. I'm going to bring about the wrath of God. That there are some things. And then also the money lenders. This is often brought up, and it's something that I brought up last night on Twitter, was that Jesus could be wrathful. And so one of the things that happened was on the temple during Sabbath, there were money changers, people who were conducting business on Sabbath, which is a clear violation of the law, of religious law. And Jesus grabbed like a cattail whip and just started beating people in the temple and throwing over their tables. That's not exactly pacifistic. He's effectively saying, get the fudge out of this holy space and do not commit sin in my presence. So while I do agree that you can absolutely translate Christ's teachings to be more pacifistic and to be more loving and more caring and empathetic, there are also teachings that are aggressive and violent. So I wonder if Andrew Wilson's going to bring that up. Grassroots for another 20. Thank you, King. Thank you for all the donos. It is appreciated. Quick shill time. Like the stream if you haven't liked it already. Comment in the chat if you want to engage with other funny people saying funny things. Comment on the VODs and engage with the VODs when they get posted to Valor and when they get posted to my home channel. And that's pretty much it. And if you have money burning a hole in your pocket, Grassroots Hegemon is obviously like the biggest. He's the financial spine of the channel, but we have other donors: Gen X, Dashing Rogue, Christian Valeris. I'm trying to think of other people, but K Soko has donated, other people. And I don't expect, we all got bills to pay, right? So if you're broke, do not worry about it. Just engage with the content. It gives me ad revenue. If you got money burning a hole in your pocket, then super chats are appreciated, but never required. Grassroots Hegemon for 20 says, Destiny, isn't that a big channel compared to Kyle Kalinske and a bunch of these TikTok folks? His community is just extremely animated. Why doesn't Kyle or other lefties motivate their communities at all? Well, that was grassroots. That was actually the idea behind PV. Even if you think progressives are too far left, the idea behind PV is that PV had a bunch of admin who had done real world political advocacy in canvassing events in the past. And so they coordinated the energy of the alternative media into real world action. That was the exact idea of the project. So the truth is that Kyle Kalinske probably doesn't know how to do it. The TikTokers don't know how to do it. And so they need an organization like PV in order to translate their communities into real world action. Jonah Boy says, a lot of the girls on these podcasts are stupid. Yeah, it's not hard to get a college degree these days. Most of it's just showing up. I mean, I agree, but I think Andrew Wilson is making the argument that there are more substantive conversations that happen on whatever podcast than you would give it credit for. And I know this is true because while I don't engage with the content on whatever podcast, I know Erin Straighterade has been on whatever podcast. She's a smart cookie. She's a lefty socialist communist dirtbag leftist, and I hate a substantive amount of her politics. However, she is a smart cookie and she can be vicious in a debate. Then same thing with Pixie. I know that people like to talk smack about Pixie, but Pixie can be quite insightful and intelligent in a debate. And she can also command a room because she sounds sweet, because she sounds innocent. She can often get people to de-escalate around her, and then she can make a point. And then same thing with Kyla. Kyla, I know that people are dogging on her for whatever her debate was yesterday or the day before, but I haven't seen any clips where she really got blown out. And she is a competent, intelligent debater as well. So acting like just because they're women or just because they're involved in promiscuity that they're somehow stupid, I don't think that's entirely true. There's a lot of stupid women on whatever podcast, but it does not mean that they are all stupid and that there aren't substantive debates. Of course he wouldn't. Jesus didn't speak English. Rises says, Kyle started the thing that spawned the Justice Democrats. No, that's actually a good point, Rises. He and Cenk Uygur spawned the Justice Democrats, and they actually got the Squad and several other progressive lefties elected. Whether or not you think that's good is a different thing, but they at least participated in electoral politics, and I think they started Justice Dems. Sacred Snow says, Kyle is one of the lefties that actually unites with the Dems around election time because they agree with lesser evil arguments. Same with Vaush. Yep. Grassroots says, Rises kind of, sort of, but he openly pooped on them, and I think that relationship has basically been lost. Well, same thing with Cenk. I think Cenk got kicked out. I can donate some pocket lint if you like. Perfect. I love lint. Harmonic Fox became a member. Excellent. Thank you, Harmonic Fox. Well, QC John says the Dean Parker racism microaggression issue is why most progressives would be afraid to do any kind of political action. Yeah, and well, QC John, you bring it up perfectly. Somebody was saying, well, why don't these alternative media creators participate in electoral politics more often? And the Un-F America tour was done by Dean Withers and I don't know if it was Harry Sisson, but it was another one of those soft boy TikTok Democrats. And they shot themselves in the foot as soon as they left the gate because they're so used to the cancellation of online media that the second they caught flack in the real world, they like put the tails between their legs and they quit. And whereas I think so in alternative media, when you get canceled, you really have two options. You can double down and fight the exterior audience, or if your own audience is turning against you, you can put your tail between your legs and then you can apologize. Well, Dean Withers apologized almost instantaneously and put his tail between his legs instantaneously. But if you want to participate in real world politics, you can't have that lack of a spine. People are going to criticize you because you're trying to achieve a real world result. So you just have to buck up and just say, yeah, that's what I'm doing. F you, right? Christian Blair says, Kyla is one of the few women that doesn't engage in sex work on whatever podcast. True. So, all right. Anyways, it's the average ghetto trash of girl that shows up to these podcasts that are dumb. Well, right. There's obviously some very unintelligent women, but that's not the point.
Not coming out and
so
my audience.
Well, how can you? Are you? So you're going to hold me to a standard you won't hold yourself to?
100%, but only because you. Only because hold on. Only because you're the one that's preaching, dude.
What? No, I just specifically say I have no ministry. I'm not a preacher, and I make zero orthodox content. Zero.
you have this moral superiority complex where you're telling everybody what is right.
What's
and
the
wrong.
morals? Well, okay,
When
so
you're telling-
that
yeah.
is true that I say that there's objective morality. You would agree with that. That Christian ethics are the objective morals in which we ought live our lives. You agree with that. But you
Yes.
can't say at the same time that you agree with those two statements that me saying you're a retard and you saying you're a retard somehow doesn't negate the fact that you're doing the exact same thing while you're trying to quote call me out.
Yeah,
Like,
dude,
how does that work, bro?
Well, because it's very easy, right? I don't come on the internet and say I am this I guess you could say teacher of
I literally say I'm not a teacher. I'm not your guru. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a minister. I'm not here to do any of those things.
So
I disagree with this, and I think that Andrew Wilson should just own it to a certain degree. When we come onto the internet, we make a presumption, and that presumption is that not only are we going to say things, we believe that people should listen to us when we say things, and that is the position of a teacher, of a mentor, of a proselytizer, etc. So him abdicating that responsibility or saying that he's not that thing, it's incorrect.
So you have an out, right? You say it's my duty to rebuke. Then you mock and shame instead of teach.
So do you.
Right. Yeah, but this is hold on.
What's the difference here? Why?
What aboutism, Andrew? What aboutism is exactly what I'm talking about with woke right? What woke right?
Well,
what
look,
aboutism?
I
argument.
would tend to agree with you that generally an argument from hypocrisy doesn't hold merit. And in this case, I'm not even making one. I'm just saying that if it is the case that your claim is Andrew thinks he's morally superior, therefore bad. And my claim that he's morally superior is because he does X activity, which is shame bad people online. Then if I ask you the same question, are you shame bad people online? How's that not more an act of moral superiority? And your answer is
because I'm not morally superior, right?
okay.
And this is another bullet that needs to be bit down on. Unironically, there's this clip of Anna Kasparian where she's like, yeah, guess what? I am better than you. And that was considered pretty cringe, pretty condescending, pretty this, pretty that, because she goes on this whole rant about how she cares about progressive policies and that makes her a better person, right? But the truth is, morality, when you boil it down, is argumentation about good and bad. That's all it is. And so Misfit Patriot and Andrew Wilson should just both bite the bullet and say, yeah, I do think my philosophy is better. Otherwise, I wouldn't advocate for it, right? I don't hide behind, oh, guys, I'm just a guy on the internet. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not better than anybody else. This like false humility. Now, I'll talk to anybody about anything. That's where I try to have real humility, where I try to, engage with ideas and people that I actually do view as quite stupid. And I'll engage with them earnestly if the other person isn't an a-hole about it. But yeah, I'm making moral judgments. You are making moral judgments by choosing to be here. You're making moral judgments about whether or not you want to be a part of their political tribe, my political tribe, Destiny's political tribe, Bobby from Geedunk Show's political tribe. You are making moral judgments, and you do think that certain moral systems are better or worse than others. Now, of course, you're in my chat, which means that you have 3,000 IQ and a pristine taste in content. So you guys truly are better than the rest of the internet. But, that's neither here nor there. Commander Haircut says, God, I remember when these freaks were bullied in the comment section for being fedora wearers. Yeah, the fedoras, these are the opposite of fedoras. These are Christian nationalists. But the truth of what you're saying is a lot of the people who are big in alternative media used to be maligned and ignored on social media. And now they're some of the biggest commentators. Andrew, for all his faults, isn't a white identitarian. Yeah, he's a Christian nationalist. So he still has an identitarian worldview. Excuse me. He still has an identitarian worldview, but it's centered on Christianity instead of race, which I do think is like a moderate improvement. Grassroots Hegemon says, for 10, the Whatever podcast has a talent of nitpicking. They have an ability to find the literal most feral people alive. Pixie, Aaron, and Erudite being the exceptions. Peace be upon them. In nome de Patria, de Filii, et de Spiritus Sancti. Blessings be upon Kyla, also known as Erudite, Pixie, and Aaron, also known as Traderade. May they live long and prosper. They need that homeland energy. Well, dude, I mean, that's what I argue for, right? Is just be like, yeah, I'm the hero. I am better. I love that. Just own it, man. Just own it. If we're grill hottest, should we be saying grills be with you? That's actually a good point. Grill be with you, and also with you. The ingoodening of Anna Kasparian was on my 2025 Apocalypse bingo card. Uh-oh. K Sogo says, thank you for reinforcing my beliefs that I am among the smartest and best commenters on YouTube. It's true. It's true, K Sogo, or else you wouldn't be here. It's weird that people don't own up to making those judgments. I make them every time someone doesn't put back their shopping cart. Exactly. At Walmart or take too long to order at Subway. Exactly. Propane be with you and also with you. Oh man, we need to make like grill hottest merch. Propane be with you. And also with you. All right, sorry. Back to the content. Chat's having too much fun and I'm having too much fun with them. Thank you again, Grassroots Hegemon. You are too kind to the channel.
Because you're not. You're not because you're not.
I am not.
So you engage in the same exact behavior and tactics, but I'm morally superior. You're not.
Yeah.
Against everybody, bro.
Bro, I'm
against everybody. You want to go through your tweets, bro?
I am a bully to bullies, bro.
You're a bully to bullies.
I'm a hypocrite. I'm a hypocrite.
Okay. Well, that was great, man. You really did me in with that one.
So K Sogo says, as a grill hottest, are you on the propane left or charcoal right? That's an interesting question. I'm going to try not to judge, I'm going to try not to judge your personal stuff, but I do have a propane grill at home. So I don't know if that makes me good or bad. I do know it makes me in line with Hank. God, is that his name? Come on, man. Why can't I think of it? It's obviously Bobby. Hank Hill, thank God. Okay, King of the Hills. Good God. I have early onset dementia, guys. It's going to be a long decade. I actually, so hold on. I want to show you guys something. I'm going to try not to dox, but I have a friend who I'm working on with Warhammer art. We've done a whole bunch of Warhammer art together, and we're still working on stuff in the background. I need to harass Travis Taze. Unfortunately, he got a job and a girlfriend, so he's been very busy recently. All he's been able to work on is Warhammer stuff because he's so busy. But propane, Promethium, Hank Hill. I'll look up Hank. There we go. So this isn't the complete one. I'll look for the complete one. But I have this. There was art of I can try to find the complete one later, but effectively I have Hank Hill with a flamer, and I think the band says Promethium and Promethium accessories. And I'll find the full one, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful art. And I want to Hank Hill. I'm going to play the content and look for it, but there's a completed version and I absolutely love it. And we just need to create the merch store and make it already. I need to harass Taze.
I am a hypocrite.
I agree.
If your argument though, if you got to take me out of it, because whataboutism is never an argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your argument is this is what's right and wrong, and then you engage, just take me completely out of it. You engage in the behavior that you yourself is wrong, then we are both hypocrites because we're both.
No, just you. And I'm going to explain. Actually, I'll explain it.
Because I'm not promoting an OnlyFans hooker talking about being.
Neither am I.
Gentlemen, I just.
Neither am I. But let me give a counter.
You can absolutely. I just want to make sure that we're realizing that we are a little off topic.
Yeah. We'll finish.
Okay,
We'll finish and move into the tactics or into the topic. So. Actually, it would just be you who's a hypocrite. So here's why. Because this is your standard you're holding for me, not my standard I'm holding for you.
So if you would be so kind as to look at your screen, we have Hank Hill as an Imperial Guardsman with his classic glasses, with a rebreather mask and a pack with a flamer. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the band that currently looks like gold or wood. And we're going to put Promethium and Promethium accessories on it. And we're going to turn it into, t-shirts, magnets, mugs, all that kind of stuff. And I have about a dozen of these.
I didn't say that you had a superiority complex. I didn't say that it was not okay for you to rebuke people who you had a problem with. These are not my positions. This is your position. By your admission, you're a hypocrite. By my admission, I'm not. I think it's perfectly acceptable, as Jesus Christ did, to call people vipers, whitewashed tombs. The distinction of the time with Jesus Christ, you would have gotten killed for calling somebody a name like that. They fucking killed you. It wasn't like oh, you're an asshole and you go about your day, because there was freedom of speech. They pulled out a fucking sword and cut your ass in half. Why
Well, actually, they just killed you with rocks, but same point.
do you think the apostles all got killed? Almost all of them got killed in horrible ways because they said things which were considered offenses, right? You don't run the risk of that. You don't run the risk of like being fucking executed because you call me names on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
In the modern world, what I'm saying has to be far less offensive than what was being said by Christ, because it's not a killable offense. Do you understand that? It's not a killable offense. These things are ways for us to engage in modernity with the people who are saying these things and give refutations and rebukes in a way which will hold eyeballs. You, though, sir, by making the bold claim that I am holding a morally superior position and then holding yourself to the same standard, are actually a hypocrite. I, though, am not.
Yeah, that was a really nice spin.
It actually was. It was a nice spin.
I'm waiting for you to give me a refutation.
I already did. I basically.
You already did.
No. I already did. Right,
Okay.
and I can actually kind of double down on that, because the way that I engage in debate with you, which is I tried last time in good faith until I sort of figured out how you do it. I try to actually stick to the topics, whereas you like to laugh and you like to get into these self-flatulation, like just.
You brought all this up, dude.
Yeah, and I did it in my opening statement. Now let's move on to the.
And so I gave refutations, and my refutation stands. You were not able to counter it. So on to the topic of the woke right.
Hold on, one final thing. When you say you weren't able to counter it after I countered it,
you didn't counter it.
It's your opinion, and it's the frame.
No. I gave an argument.
You basically literally just after every argument, Andrew, you say I win, and you do it over and
only
over
if I win.
No,
only if I win, yeah.
You didn't win.
If you don't listen, so that you know how arguments work.
This is going to be.
You give refutations. You give a refutation of what a person said. You can't double down and say I self-proclaim myself to be a hypocrite, and then by my standard of me being a hypocrite, by my standards, you are too. I don't hold the same standards and gave you the refutation.
Let's move on. This is going to be
okay. We'll go on. So let's go. Let's move on to the woke right then. Okay. So can I get a definition of the woke right?
Yes, it is a group of people that engage in identity politics, a victim mentality, with a hyperfixation on race. And I would say that the closest group that sort of, I think, embodies the entirety of it would be the Groper movement, right? Where the left has the evil white
So Christian Valera says, because Andrew isn't at risk of dying, therefore his speech isn't as bad as what was said by Jesus doesn't necessarily track. Christian Valera's, I'm with you, but I think that if we make the argumentation that he is less offensive than Jesus and the apostles, I think that is true. Because Jesus and the apostles, they were challenging both the Jewish domination of monotheism, where Judaism was a closed religion, and they opened this up to churches across all of Rome, the Roman Empire. And so that was a challenge. Also claiming that Jesus was the Messiah was a challenge to Judaism. But I would also say that the apostles and Jesus were also a challenge to the religious power of the pagan Romans. And so in that context, what they were saying 2,000 years ago was more offensive than Andrew Wilson bullying, women on the internet who are promiscuous, right? So I think from that line of argumentation, I can see it, even if it doesn't necessarily track one-to-one, I can still see what he's saying. Then Grassroots Hegemon says, this is exactly what I was saying earlier. Andrew maintains his locus of control so that he never has to exit his own framework. I agree. And I think that that's like a decent line of argumentation where you can't get blown out. But I also think that it can be, I'm not accusing Andrew of cowardice, but I think it can be a form of intellectual cowardice where, since you're not willing to leave your locus of control, you're not willing to engage with more provocative arguments that you might have to think about on the fly. And so if you're always like attacking, but the second that you get a punch back, you're always, bracing up within your thing, you can say that that's like a good rhetorical strategy in order to never get blown out. But I also think it's a very conservative argumentative strategy. I'll put it that way. Commander Haircut says, I hope that lady is playing Rivals or something instead of playing Close Attention. Well, she moderated twice, so, she's paying somewhat attention. Samuel Haynes says, this is too much psychic damage for me, Chief. Well, I'm sorry, boss, but we're in here because we need to fight. We need to, in my opinion, expand the war of the woke right. So we need James Lindsay, Jordan Peterson, and moderate conservatives to call out the far right and the woke right. And we need to have this fight. This fight needed to happen 2 years ago, but late is better than never. K Soko says, host looks like a wax doll. The real host already left. Well, maybe she's a synthetic. Want to play Rivals? Jonah Boy says, saying the earth was round was offensive at the time. It's also offensive to some people now. Incredible. Well, true. And some of those people are woke right.
White capitalist is the source of.
Well, hang on. Can we just stay with the
Sure.
definition first? And I just make sure I get it down correctly. So a group of people who engage in identity politics and
identity politics.
Correct, Sacred Snow. Arguing the definition of insurrection for 2 hours is not intellectually brave.
Politics have a victim mentality.
okay.
They have a hyperfixation on race.
Okay.
Whereas, let's say, like
I would say a hyperfixation on identity, but I will accept this for the argument.
race is better than yours, right?
Got it. Yep.
Moral superiority, or
Yep.
I guess that would be identity politics. And what's the other one? I can't remember what I said. Victim mentality, race, and identity politics. Those are the three, I would say, main tenets. Oh, I'm sorry. The fourth one is, and the final one, there's four, is the tactics of coercion and exclusion. Essentially, cancel culture. When you disagree with them, it's groupthink, mob mentality, where they will attack the people who disagree.
Got it. So just to make sure, woke right, a group of people engage in identity politics, victim mentality, hyperfixation on race, and utilize tactics of coercion and exclusion.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me why our founding fathers weren't woke right?
Yes.
Ooh. I actually, so hold on. I want to argue this before he does. So with identity politics, how were our founding fathers not woke right? It could be argued that the freedom of speech clause, freedom of conscience, right of religion, etc., would be a lack of focus on identity politics, that they didn't have a victim mentality, they had a victor's mentality, because not only did they feel aggrieved by the British government, but they were willing to fight and win. Moral absolutism, they didn't have moral absolutism because they created like a liberal framework in order to maximize the freedom of their citizens. And then reform versus revolution, they were revolutionaries, but they also instantiated a system of reform. So actually, I like Andrew Wilson's point, because I think that if you take it on a surface level, you can make argumentations for why the founders would be woke right. But I also think that there's equally evident contradictory evidence. I don't know if that was repetitive, but I stand by what I said, okay?
I can actually.
Okay.
So we have the founders who, let's say, exclusion.
Let's see. So they're a group of people who definitely engaged in identity politics in a very big way.
Yes.
They definitely had a victim mentality.
Well,
they
emphasize individual rights and moral.
they had a, well, hang on, I'm just going by your criteria. They had a hyper fixation on race, and they definitely practiced coercion and massive exclusion. They excluded women. They excluded minorities. They basically excluded everything. They even excluded Jews. They excluded everybody who wasn't a far Western European Christian. That would be mostly Britain and France.
Mhm.
And they definitely had a fixation on race. They definitely had a victim mentality. They were saying that England was persecuting them.
Yeah, we're arguing this. We're arguing this.
Yeah. So how is it that they don't fit?
2025.
How is it that our founders don't fit every single criteria of the woke right?
Because it's 2025.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good argument, but I'll let Misfit Patriot go again. And I think for every argument that he presents, there's equal and opposite evidence. So just as an example, they're saying, oh, they exclude Jews because it's like white men of good character and all that kind of stuff. Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for, whatever of grievances, redress of grievances. So you can argue that the men at the time were bigoted against Jews and Muslims and excluded them from the upper echelons of society. But within the First Amendment, there is the opportunity for those people to be integrated into the lower and middle rungs of society. And so I don't think that works necessarily. You can say that individually they were bigoted, but they did instantiate that into the government. Again, I don't think you can argue that they complained about the grievances of the Brits and the king. However, I think when we're talking about victim mentality, we're talking about perpetual victimhood. We're talking about even when things are good, you're still the victim. And so I don't think that the founding fathers had a victim mentality at all. I think that they had a victor's mentality where they knew what they thought was right and they were willing to fight and die for it. So I don't think they were victims. I think they were victors. Coercion and exclusion, that 100% did happen, but it happened within a liberal framework, which is looser than any other organization. And then reform versus revolution, they're revolutionaries. So, I see the points that Andrew's making. I still think that there's historical arguments for why he's wrong. Samuel Haynes says, I so want to force everyone who gets involved with online political debates to actually take at least one class in debate. Well, yeah, Samuel Haynes, one of the things that I would like to do long term, first we need to make enough money and create enough content in order for Valor to be self-sustaining financially. That's step number 1. But step number 5, probably, I want to go to Toastmasters because those are the people who master rhetoric and debate. And I also wouldn't mind doing a debate class because obviously in Twitch and YouTube politics, there's common things like red heresy. Sorry, I have Warhammer on the brain. Red herrings, arguments ad populum, arguments ad absurdum, arguments ad, name another thing. There's appeals to hypocrisy. There's, I'm trying to think of another one. There's whataboutism. There's so many different lines of argumentation that are incorrect that it's good to know those fallacies. But I also think in Twitch and YouTube politics, it's such a Burger King parking lot knife fight that you could effectively just list all of the logical fallacies as they occur and then never have a debate or a conversation. The red heresy. Yeah, my bad. So just to share it, Warhammer TV is releasing new content very slowly, but the good news is that we have a brand new 3D animation about Titans during the Horus Heresy. And that's why the red heresy was on the brain, was because it's like something Lupercal. They just released the trailer for the new Titan animation, which is excellent news for me. That means that I'm going to have good income for maybe June. May might be okay, and then June will probably be very good. Soko says, Sam, these online debates are not rooted in actual real debate. This is only for the clout, not for the good of the arguments. Yeah, I agree. Now, that being said, you can still have good arguments within the Burger King parking lot knife fight that is Twitch and YouTube politics. But I do agree that it's more about clout, influence, perception, optics. That's more important than the actual quality of the arguments. I agree.
That's not an argument.
If woke right was created in 1776, you could make this argument.
So
right?
Was George Washington woke right?
Yeah. Again, I'm not playing this.
Can he answer my question? Was George Washington woke right?
No, because it didn't exist.
Oh, because it didn't exist.
You're asking me to. Was George?
Okay. Can I ask you? Let me ask a different question then. Did George Washington engage?
I'm going to work out while these guys are yapping.
Engage in identity politics.
Again, identity politics. The founders emphasize now for their time. They emphasize individual rights, moral agency over group identity. They endorsed broader principles, right? For example, equality under the law. Now, I understand that there was
for everybody.
All equality was a different word back then.
Oh, so it wasn't for everybody. So they definitely practice exclusion. We can agree on that.
Under the law of their time.
So we can definitely say they practice exclusion.
They equality under the law.
Would you say that? Would you say slavery is coercion?
Under that law?
Yeah.
No, that they didn't.
No?
They didn't view slavery the same way.
So
You're trying to-
slavery was not coercion?
You're trying to create a false equivalency between.
Then why did they outlaw international
1700.
slavery? Why did our founders outlaw international
What was it,
slavery and
9
they
out
only
of-
used localized slavery?
9 out of the 13 colonies were against slavery. Slavery was on its way out before this country was.
International slavery was. Slavery
Yeah.
persevered until the late 1800s.
Oh, I
when we
know
had
it.
a
I
civil
know it
war.
did. I'm not saying it was.
But they definitely can you just answer my questions?
I think
They definitely practiced exclusion and coercion.
not under their laws,
It's loud.
Okay, so how did they not practice exclusion under
because
their laws?
under their laws, those
On my end, Misfit Patriot is low and Andrew Wilson is high.
exclusions were legal.
So as long as it's legal, it's
I'm
so if
saying-
the Gropers got everything they wanted and it was legal, that would be fine then.
Well, that's there's a totalitarian argument to the woke right where they want to change the law.
Yeah, I know, but you're not really engaging here. So the thing is if all the Gropers, if it is the case that it was okay because it was the law, if the Gropers got everything that they okay, so then was it coercion and exclusion? Did they practice coercion and exclusion?
For that time, yes.
Okay,
I'm gonna DM Andrew and just say, hey, you want to yap about this?
they did. So they meet at least the fourth category. Did they hyper focus on race?
That's why I would say hyper focus on identity. That I would not have used race.
Again, you're talking about a different time.
Can you just answer my question,
No,
dude?
if this is your argument, then you're creating a bullshit argument. to
Okay,
try to
but
compare.
can you just listen? I'll answer to your cross examination with yes or no's. Can you do
Yes,
that for me?
Yes, they did, Andrew.
Okay, they did. They hyper focused on race. Do you think that they engaged in identity politics?
They again emphasized individual rights and moral agency. They didn't want.
So that was identitarianism under the axiom of God, right? The axiom of God was our identity as a Christian nation is that we hold these truths to be self-evident under God, that this people group deserves X rights, right?
I agree. Yes.
Okay, so then there would be identitarians for sure, and they practiced identity politics for sure, right?
Identity as a nation.
Well, as a people group as well, because not everybody could participate in the nation unless they were part of certain people groups.
You could say that. Yes.
Okay, so then what you have established is that our founding fathers were all woke right by your admission.
If you want to try to fit that square peg in that round hole, by your definition, the founders were woke right.
Well, no, you just conceded that.
Commander Haircut says Andrew Wilson is getting super loud when Misfit Patriot doesn't say or do what he wants him to do. It is funny because Andrew Wilson does do that sometime where he's like, logically this, and then you have to back off and you have to go like, is it logically that? And then you have to take a second to think about what he said and then decide whether or not you actually do agree or don't agree, because he does engage in the same social pressure as Pisco, for example. Pisco will often, he'll line up like logical statement, conclusion. Don't you agree with my conclusion? And then you have to back off of it, because when you're an agreeable person, I actually kind of am an agreeable person. The instinct is to be like, well, you made 3 logical statements and then a conclusion, and I see how you got there, so I guess I agree. But you have to pause, because just because it's logical statement, conclusion doesn't mean that you actually agree with all of the sub-premises, or the sub-premises are accurate, or you agree with the conclusion derived from those premises. So you have to be careful with people like Pisco and with people like Andrew Wilson, where tone, and I know it's weird to moral frog about tone, but tone and logic building can be used to try to pressure you into agreeing or stating things that you don't actually believe. So you have to be careful with Andrew Wilson and with Pisco, because they will build a chain of logic and then attempt to get agreement. And if you don't agree, they'll call you an idiot. Grassroots Chachamon says George Washington was the original Pete Hegseth, outrageous drunk, more bravery and idiocy than brain. For one of them, it worked. Well, yeah. That, I don't know if you've seen the Shane Gillis bit, but there's this excellent Shane Gillis bit where he's like, I know how we won the Revolutionary War. We had a 6'2" drunken red-haired psycho who crossed the Delaware in the dead of winter in order to take out Prussian mercenaries. Like, there's no, that's terrifying. When you think about who George Washington was as a person, he's actually a terrifying human being. We're really not a Christian nation. Okay, Soko, it's a historical argument that I don't really care to split hairs on. If you look at the writings of some of the founding fathers, they make the argument that you can't have a liberal society without Christian morality. I think that Benjamin Franklin might have even said something to that effect. And I like Benjamin Franklin. I think he's a smart cookie. So I don't care to argue back and forth whether or not the founders intended Christianity to be the religion for 99% of its participants or not. I don't care, right? I don't care. Because the truth is, they recognize the conflicts even within Christian sects of various forms of Protestantism and Catholicism. And they recognize that if they picked a specific religion for the New World, then they were effectively creating the precursors for civil holy war. So they didn't. They said, whatever you are, not a big deal, right? Jonah Boy says, you got to break the logic chain before they get to their conclusion. Yeah, but then you have to interrupt them when they're on a yap. And you know me, I love to yap, but they love to yap too. Iron says, I don't know. I think Hegses would have spazzed out about having von Steuben in the army. Maybe. Harmonic Fox says, sure, but then I'd say there's different types of Christianity and Christian ethics. A lot of the founding fathers were proto-universalists. Yeah, there was even like a couple of them were non-literalist deists. If I remember correctly, I think the Jefferson Bible, it tries to eliminate the mysticism and mythology and miracles of the Bible and keep all of the moral philosophy, if I remember correct. A few of the founding fathers were deists, not exactly religious per se. Yeah, and I'm with them. I think Abraham Lincoln was like that as well, if I remember correctly.
Every portion of the definition that you gave applies to the founding fathers, which would include George Washington, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you basically...
Silver Jacket Man, I would also point out the founders were not a monolith. They had varying opinions on a lot of stuff, 100%. And so they wanted maximal liberty, 100%.
George Washington is woke, right?
Yes, Andrew.
Okay.
George Washington is under your definition is woke, right?
I don't know why he's laughing. Yeah, Andrew Wilson is bringing up like logical points where George Washington would meet the definition of woke, right? I would simply argue on its face, why not, right?
Well, it's how is it my definition? Did I give you a definition of woke, right?
I'm sorry, Andrew. You're right. Under my definition that you utilize that
I used.
You manipulated.
How did I manipulate it? I just applied it. I just applied it.
This is why I had to say this in my opening statement. What you do is you manipulate conversation.
That's not manipulation. It's an argument.
Yeah.
And what I did was a Socratic method in order to apply your definition and see if you consistently would apply it across the board.
Because you asked me a question over and over again if they engage in identity politics, and I told you they emphasize individual rights.
But those rights didn't apply to everybody, right?
They fought to get rid of slavery as opposed to what the woke right now is, which is
did they fight to give women rights?
At the time, I don't think so. No.
So the thing is
that they were trying to.
Yeah, but if it is the case that you
all right, I'm going to leave you in their competent hands. I'm going to use the restroom. I'll be back in 120 seconds.
Include half of the population, that would be pretty identitarian, right?
There was a focus on race, but it wasn't exclusionary. It was
it wasn't exclusionary. The focus on race by our founders was not exclusionary. Did you just say that?
I say that they were trying to end slavery by the founding of this country. They were on their way to working towards a society.
No, they abolished international slavery and then kept grandfathered slavery in until all of them were dead.
When we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created,
but not women, right?
Yeah. Exactly. You're talking about a different time.
Again, yeah, so not all women. So then it's exclusionary definitionally, right?
If you view this argument through the lens of 1776, my definition and yours can be taken as woke right if you use this framing tactic.
Yeah. So it's not a framing tactic. It's just applying it. So if I were to say, for instance, would you consider of course no, I'm just reducing. It is true that I'm reducing the argument, but the thing is arguments beg to be reduced so that we can see if they're consistent. When we move back, for instance, if I were to ask you, a lot of the founders, you agree with me, like Thomas Jefferson, were deists, right?
Yeah, there was a couple.
Yeah, they were deists. You wouldn't say that those are Christians, would you?
No.
Okay, but even though that at the time, right, the way that Christianity was practiced in the United States, far different than it is now, but you can still make the application for consistency as to what a Christian was or wasn't. Your idea of woke right is taking a descriptor of behaviors, and then with the descriptor of behaviors, you're trying to assign it a label, in this case, woke right. That's fine to do, but the descriptor needs to apply across all groups. So otherwise, the descriptor is meaningless, doesn't point to anything. Because this descriptor is about behaviors, just like with the trans movement. If you were to say a woman is a woman, or is a woman is a woman, it's an infinite regress. So if I said, Misfit Patriot, what is a woman? You said a woman's anybody.
All right, I don't care about like definitional stuff. You know, these are the kinds of things where I prefer to talk about the ideas rather than like the lines of argumentation or the logic of argumentation. I think Misfit Patriot made a mistake in my book of opening up whether or not Andrew Wilson is a good person or whether or not he argues in good faith and all that kind of stuff. Because then instead of talking about the topic, you talk about whether or not the other person is operating in good faith. And I just don't care, right? So Grassroots says Jefferson was weirdly deist, but also heavily was interested in propping up a Protestant version of the Catholic Church because of its virtue for society. Agreed. I actually think that's based. Sarah 702 says Washington was anti-political party, so that's what I would use to argue wasn't right or left. Sure. All men would be everyone of mankind, right? Yeah. What is it? It's like the Declaration of Independence is we hold these truths to be self-evident that in the eyes of God, all men are created equal. Let me get the exact verbiage. Declaration of Independence. Text, sure. Images. Oh. Did I get that wrong? We hold these truths to be self-evident. Yeah. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Man, according to a bunch of libertarians, the founding fathers would be communists. Dude, I hate libertarians so much. I understand there might be libertarians in my chat, but the truth is, that the United States is the most libertarian or liberal government ever instantiated. And yet because the government does things and has taxes, there are modern libertarians who would call the founding fathers communist, which is just like, it's so infuriating. It's almost beyond parody. So all men, I think the fact that the founding fathers agreed on this concept of all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with unalienable rights, I would say that this is a refutation of the fact that they're obsessed with identity. That would be my argument. Reducing arguments does not equal streamlining arguments. Agreed. Andrew Wilson has confounded Destiny and Vosh. He is extremely underrated on the debate front. I think he's properly rated. I think people know that he's dangerous and they're scared of him rhetorically. That's probably why you don't see a lot of people arguing with him, is because he can absolutely trounce middle tier and low level debaters. And then I think the big ones are a little bit scared of getting trounced. And so they don't participate with him half as much, even though he creates fire content. Grassroots says, that's not to be mean to any Catholics or Baptists in chat, but deists did have their own preference and leanings, but it was because it was the safest, not because it was true. Yes. Sacred Snow says, just focus on separation of church and state and whether or not the founding fathers wanted a majority Christian nation is irrelevant. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, bro. This is like an argument that I wouldn't care. I would just say what I would do if I was Misfit Patriot. Let me give my Monday morning quarterback, okay? That the opening preamble to the Declaration of Independence is anti-identity politics, as is the First Amendment. So even if they individually practice identity politics, or if they were racist against blacks, Native Americans, or sexist against women, they were very, very, very liberal for their time about who they included within their group. That they did not have a victim mentality, they had a victor's mentality. They made their arguments about what they were going to fight for and why, and then they fought for it and they got it. They didn't have a perpetual victim mentality. Moral absolutism, I don't think they had moral absolutism. I think that within the liberal framework of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instantiated in order to secure those rights, I think there's plenty of room back and forth for the way that freedom and liberty can express themselves. Reform versus revolution, you would say that they were revolutionaries against the crown, but I would also say that within the Constitution of the United States itself, they intentionally created the possibility of reform in order to prevent future revolution. So, you know, I think that I understand what Andrew Wilson is saying. I think he's arguing it well, but I do think he's incorrect. So bring back 4chan, dystopian, libertarian, green text. True. Conservative liberalism says the founding fathers didn't care for a standing army for federal income tax. We barely had the latter for a century. Yeah, but conservative liberalism, what I would argue, because I took a history class on it, and I'm going to parrot mindlessly what I learned in the history class, is that throughout the 19th century, there was this idealist version of what the founding fathers wanted, which is we were going to keep a very minimal standing army. That way we would only stand up the army in the event of conflict. But what happened through the 19th century with the expansion westward was we always had conflict. So the army would grow and shrink for the Mexican-American War, for the Barbary Pirate Wars, et cetera, et cetera. Then in the early 20th century, we obviously got involved in World War I and World War II, and the founding fathers would have hated that. They would have thought that it was way too far in interventionism and involving ourselves in the affairs of foreigners. But the argument from the early 20th century onward and the security state is that the world is so complex, you need standing security in order to sustain the global market and make sure that you don't get sucked into catastrophic wars. And I know people like to argue that Vietnam was bad and the global war on terror was bad and the Persian Gulf War was bad, all that kind of bullshit. But compared to letting the rest of the world eat itself and start World War III, we've actually done a really good job since World War II preventing World War III. So the founding fathers, while brilliant, weren't right about everything 100% of the time. Sacred Snow says, Andrew is incredibly good at breaking down arguments and you need to make sure you understand your position perfectly. Yes, you need to pay attention. You cannot sleep on Andrew. Biz D says, thoughts on PF Young? I think there's a 7% chance he's a Nazi. He's not a Nazi. He's just a centrist who talks about Zionist occupied government too much. K. Soko says, all men are created equal, speaks to class and not race. Everyone understands that, right? Peons are just as much of a person as a king. Yeah, I agree. Commander Haircut says, I don't even know who is arguing for or against woke right. This guy, Misfit Patriot, is arguing that woke right exists, can be defined, and is a problem. Andrew Wilson is saying that the definition is too ephemeral and it's being used as a cudgel in order to beat normie conservatives. Conservative liberalism says Jefferson knew that he was a contradiction. He knew the sin of slavery was against his own morality and looked forward to being it remedied. Yep. People are hypocrites all the time. Grassroots Hegemon says, at the time it spoke much more to people's proclaimed faith than race. We literally had Irish, Italian, and Chinese slaves when that was written. The race wasn't the point at the time. Yeah. Ethnos was something that people considered during that time for sure. We got involved with empire building similar to Europe with the Philippine and South American banana wars due to corporations. Right. And based corpo wars, man. You think I don't want to colonize Pandora? You think I don't want to be a space marine going to Pandora to kill a bunch of space hippies and native, alien Indians? Bud123 says, hey man, just woke up and I'm drinking coffee. Well, excellent. Quick chill time before we get back into the content. Like the stream so everybody knows that we're live. Comment and chat. That way we get algorithmic boost. Engage with the VODs if you have to dip out for work or family issues. Super chats are never required, but always appreciated. Please do not leave Grassroots Hegemon alone. I feel bad enough that this man gives us so much gosh darn money. I know that everybody else is working for a living and paying bills and their IRAs are not doing great, but don't leave Grassroots Hegemon alone. He is too kind to this channel, and I don't want to rely on him alone for super chats. Harmonic Fox says everyone should go see the movie Sinners if they haven't yet. True. Apparently it's very good.
They set these laws, right? So we started with
Christian Valeris makes a point that's aligned with me, so I need to read it before we continue. Speaking descriptively, not morally, I'm fine with empire building as long as American leaders are honest with citizenry and grunts. Agreed. I think that's one of the greatest challenges of the early 20th century.
These are the American laws, right? The founders founded the law. They didn't try to change the laws that they founded. They founded the laws that we are supposed to abide by. Okay, so they're trying to change the laws of the founders.
No, they're not. Listen here, I'll give you an example. And the thing is, I'm not a groper, but this is so silly. It's so easy. It's so easy for me to dismantle it.
I said you were woke right adjacent.
Yeah, but then, I mean,
woke.
I'm not saying you did. I'm just saying, like, I'm not even a groper, and this still is just so easy to dismantle. It makes no sense. So if we go through this, when you say, well, our founders are trying to give us laws we can't dismantle, that's just factually not true. They gave us, they gave us multiple amendment processes to do this. Like, for instance, we have the 19th Amendment. We have the 18th Amendment, right, which was the prohibition on alcohol. We have, I mean, I could go through line after line. The same thing with the 10th Amendment, which gave states all sorts of appropriate rights to change, including the state religion if they wanted to. So it's like, how could you even make this argument that, well, they want to change laws? Like, so?
Do you think that the Gropers are arguing for constitutional amendments and legal process of changing laws, or do you think that they're saying, like, we need to kick every Indian out of the country? Do you
lawfully? I've only ever heard them say lawfully that they want to do these things.
I think I've heard it differently than
well. Where are they advocating violence? I don't see them advocating violence.
Do you want me to go right now into?
No, hang on. You can't take anons, because if you take anons.
Hey, conservative liberalism. I want to show you something really interesting in a second. So stand by for 36.85 trillion. Does Andrew Wilson want to get rid of the Constitution? I don't know. I think he would argue for some form of Christian nationalism. I could argue whether or not he wants to get rid of the Constitution. I could ask him. What is a groper? Is there an Urban Dictionary definition? It's followers of Nick Fuentes. They're Christian nationalists, Christian theocrats. They absolutely want to get rid of the Constitution of the United States. They want to make the United States a neo-monarchic dictatorship Christian theocracy with Nick Fuentes or someone like Nick Fuentes at the head. They think that Donald Trump and JD Vance are dog whistling about their perspectives, and that effectively they're closet Christian nationalists. And so whenever they do something that's good for Christian nationalists, the Gropers applaud the Trump admin. And whenever they do something that's bad for Christian nationalism, they harshly criticize the Trump admin. And why do we need the term woke right? Don't we have dissident right as a term? Justin Fincher, I'll answer that in a second. But hold on. Conservative liberalism, I want to show you something. So what is the interest rate of the national U.S. debt? So the average interest rate is 3.28%. We are spending, I don't know, it's like 10%, 15% on interest payments, but 3.28% of national debt is pretty much free money with inflation. So for me, like the way that it works on a what's called a fiat currency is that as long as people have faith in the economy and the currency, you can go on forever. And with a 3.78 or whatever the interest rate is, this is 3.32. Okay. This is almost free money. It's free real estate, if you will. And so this is probably enough profit that the central bank can still loan stuff out. But you need to understand that $35 trillion is being charged at a rate that is almost equivalent to inflation. I would cut off a finger in order to have 3.2% on my debt. My mortgage is at like 4. So this is excellent terms, I guess is the best way to say it. Those super chats are unhinged. Of course they are. They appeal to schizos. Justin Fincher says, why do we need the term woke right? Don't we have dissident right as a term? Because Justin Fincher, dissident right is not a pejorative label. People in the dissident right refer to themselves as dissident right. And let's face it, the term dissident is sexy, okay? Being a dissident, being against the mainstream, rebelling against mainstream society is attractive, right? So woke right, the reason why James Lindsay didn't coin the term but popularized it is because he thinks that there's nefarious elements of the right, and he doesn't even have the same definition. He talks about like dark tetrad. He talks about, what is it? They're Machiavellian. They're psychopathic. They're narcissistic, and they're sadistic. So this is what James Lindsay says they are. And what he says is that there's right-wing grifters who have all of the issues of the left, who use Machiavellianism. So they don't say what they truly believe. They say what they think will achieve the result. They're psychopathic, so they're not sympathetic to anybody besides themselves. They're narcissistic, so they're self-obsessed, and they're sadistic, so they enjoy the vicarious pain of other people. And what he's saying is that these grifters on the right advocate for policies that mirror onto the far left. And I think that this person identified that identity politics, so it's identity obsessed, that there's a victim mentality, that there's moral absolutism, there's moral, and by the way, this is just like describing MAGA to me, and they want revolution instead of reform. And so I think this is a perfectly apt definition of woke right, and I'm perfectly okay segregating these people and criticizing them because I do think that they're bad, and it's been a problem for a half decade. And this is why, despite being raised Republican, I didn't vote for Donald Trump, and I'm a huge critic of the MAGA movement, is exactly because of what James Lindsay articulated and now what Misfit Patriot is articulating. Christian Blair says, Andrew may be hiding his power level. States he wants Christian nationalism expressed culturally by American leadership. Sure. I saw a groper wearing an America First sweatshirt in my local Best Buy, shaking my head. That's crazy. Ain't no virgin running my country. Sorry, Nick Fuentes. True. Well, QC John says, I actually don't understand what the belief difference is between Gropers and Matt Walsh, Andrew Wilson type Christian nationalists. I think it's whether or not they're revolutionary or reformists. I think that I've talked to Andrew Wilson. I think he does want to collapse the system, and he is anti-liberal, but I guess you're right. I think that Nick Fuentes is just like a little bit more racist. He's more race realist and anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish. Bud123 says, no, the inflation destroys people's paychecks so they don't keep up. Not if you increase wages over time. I'm not a great economic mind. It just feels like we're in a slow car crash. Aren't we soon approaching a point where we can't afford to pay the interest on our debt? Not anytime soon. Hearshot says, Lindsay says woke right are anti-liberal and anti-Israel in a nutshell. Yep. Free money as the cost of your working class. It is not even put forth towards infrastructure that we need, much less pay for itself. Well, Bud123, I agree with you. We shouldn't be endlessly printing cash in order to do infrastructure projects overseas. We should be creating domestic infrastructure projects that in turn grow our domestic economy, which in turn grows our tax base. We are improperly investing what we're spending. I agree with that. So K Soko says, Connor, did you really say free money? You know there's no such thing. It's mostly a meme, guys, but at the same time, I would kill for a 3.32% interest rate. And what is inflation right now? And what was inflation last year? What is inflation right now? Is 2.3%. What was inflation in 2024? 2.9%. You're getting charged 0.03% interest compared to inflation. That's about as close to free as you get. I understand that you're saying in economics there's no such thing as a free lunch. I understand all of that. I'm just saying that if inflation is 2.9% and you're getting it on 3.32% for terms, that effectively means that you're taking money on a 0.042% interest rate. And so if you invested that into the American economy to build the kind of infrastructure that grows the economy, that's as close to free as you get. Bud123 says it does not. It goes up at least 2 to 3% a year. During COVID, it went up 10% max, and there has not been a correction. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Let's build some airports, bro. Let's build some roads. Let's build some super cities. Let's get crazy. Grasser Chachabon for $10 says, this is untrue. I'm an MMT aware person that money isn't free. It's cheap, but running that at scale, holding the global dollar, those gains are diminished quickly in a consumer economy. Agreed. We are investing the money improperly. Okay. We agree on that point. But I'm saying that the $36 trillion debt bomb, I think, is an exaggerated fear. And here's the thing too. Sorry, we'll get back into the content momentarily. But if the $36 trillion debt bomb were an issue that we actually care about, and fiscal conservatives on the right truly care about it, then how come Doge went from saving us a few $1 billion to now it's less than 150 million, and that's it? Like, seriously, we have a $6 trillion budget. We have a $2 trillion deficit. Doge and the Trump admin care about fiscal conservatism because they're worried about the debt bomb. And they don't care. Like, they're not doing what they say they're doing. All they're doing is they're slashing programs they don't like so they can redistribute that money to programs they do like. And then Mr. Bombastic says debt to GDP ratio is what's important. Yeah, but let's take a look at debt to GDP ratio by country. We're at like 123%. But if you look at some of the poorest countries on the planet, they have a worst. They have a worse debt to GDP ratio. Sudan has a worse one. Japan is a very developed country. They have a worse one. Singapore is, they have a worse one, and they're a better economy. Eritrea sucks. Lebanon sucks. Venezuela sucks. Greece, Italy, Bahrain, etc. sucks. But there's also developed countries in here. 124, 111, 105, 102, 95. So everybody is hovering around 100%, and we're the ones who fought the biggest war since World War II, and we're only at 125, whereas they're at like 100, right? And then we still have Japan and Singapore, which are incredibly powerful economies and incredibly powerful countries, especially relative to their size, and they're at almost 200. And I don't see anybody shorting Singaporean or Japanese stocks because they have a vibrant economy. Grassroots Judgment for 10 says, I truly care about it, but I'm a libertarian. I'm surprised you put up with all my status bullshit. Doge mostly just went after agencies that effed with Elon's contracts. Exactly. The savings are in Trump coin. Yeah. All right. Anyways, K-Soko's going to ask a very real question. Then we're going to get back into the content. On a very real question, the military lost funding for 1 year. What would happen? If the military lost funding for 1 year, what would happen? Honest assessment, please. I think the world would eat itself. Okay. So what you would have if the U.S. military lost funding for a year, bear in mind that the U.S. military is less than $1 trillion right now. So it's not even 1/6 of, well, I guess it is 1/6 of our budget. But let's take a look at the world. Google Maps, Israel. We'll start with this. Let's say the United States military stops functioning in its entirety and the entire world is left to its own devices. I think that Russia would swallow what it wanted to of Ukraine. Maybe it would stop here. Maybe it would take the entire thing. All of NATO would be reliant on each other in order to survive since the United States is out of the game. Yemen would continue to missile shipping, so we'd lose billions of dollars by having to force commercial shipping around the Cape. Also, there'd probably be more terrorist attacks in the Middle East and North Africa. Israel would bomb Iran's nuclear facilities and then might not do enough damage in order to actually take out Iran's nuclear capability. Iran would nuclearize, so Saudi Arabia would nuclearize as well. So now you have a three-way Western style standoff between Israel, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Iran, without United States contradictory intervention, would 100% take over Iraq, more so than they already have, and they would also push militants in order to fighting and destroying Israel. We already have Sudanese slaughter, so that would happen. China would take back Taiwan. So there's a few million souls who are now under threat of Chinese authoritarian communism. Philippines would fall into China's orbit. That's another few million souls into communist orbit. Australia would be the beacon of freedom in Oceania, I guess you would call it. However, Australia, because they're so economically tied to China, you would start seeing communist stuff in their politics, and you already do. You already do see Chinese influence in Australian politics, but that would get worse. Central and South America would probably eat itself. So yeah, so without America as the military economic hegemon, the world eats itself. That's what happens. So fuck that is what I have to say. We need to get back into the content, but you guys are asking interesting questions. Is this a weave? I don't know. I'm a mean libertarian. Good. Yeah, that's not how that works. Every shut it down until I had to show up for duty. Yeah. And then you have a bunch of pissed off, unpaid American soldiers and Marines. That's not good. Bud123 says the Republicans in Congress keep spending money on stupid stuff and aren't trying to be fiscally responsible and spend money. Yeah, at this point, I'm just presuming that Republicans use fiscal conservatism as a bludgeon through which to gain popular appeal with, frankly, people like me, and then just cut the programs that they hate and then fund all the programs that they like. The last person to almost balance the budget was Bill Clinton. Think about that. Ironside says, one of the only good things about the USAA is that they cover your pay somewhat during shutdowns. Wonder if they would keep doing that if one lasted more than a month or two. Yeah. They aren't cutting anything. Yep. Right now, America via NATO is subsidizing the euro. Seems jank. Sure. We can balance responsibilities between Europe and us. That's not my argument. I would love it if Europe stopped, like, paid, quote unquote, their fair share towards the international defense. That's not my problem. My problem is thinking that we need to walk away from the world entirely. I think that's naive and stupid, and it'll kill millions of people. Christian Blair says, throughout all this conflict, Hassan would obfuscate and celebrate. Yeah, because he'd be celebrating the multipolar world. Grassroots Hegemon says, if you cut the US DOD budget to the bone, you wouldn't be able to close to addressing the problem. Social Security is the elephant in the room. Agreed. It's welfare spending. Now, I think that some level of welfare is necessary for a healthy, happy, productive society. But I also think that the way that we do it creates perverse incentives that can be dysgenic and destructive to society. I'm a conservative. I'm a mildly socially and fiscally conservative. I would argue never Trump Republican. But if you want to say that some of these are Democrat policies, I don't give a shit anymore. I care more about the policies than I care about the labels at this point.
I can go on any side of the political spectrum.
No. Let's go with Nick Fuentes yesterday, right?
Okay.
Kingslayer Damocles says, what's your opinion on Republicans in the House continuously blocking the Hearing Protection Act? If you're talking about the deregulation of suppressors, one, I think they're wussies. Number two, I think that's going to take education. I don't think that you're going to get the American public to, because silencers in movies effectively make murders easy. And I think that could be true to a degree in the real world if silencers become as common as switches, right, in the hood. However, that being said, what legislative mandate does Congress have to make guns loud? Why do guns have to shatter your eardrum? Where is it written in the Second Amendment that in order to exercise your right to keep and bear arms, you must explode your inner ear? I don't think there's a logical reason behind suppressors being as regulated as they are. And I think that what you would need to do in order to educate people is you would probably need to regulate like decibel range, where you can make them hearing safe but still audible. And then you could address all the crime concerns. And then maybe you would need a permit in order to get like Hollywood safe ear pro, but you can make it hearing safe and still loud. You could effectively make it the sound of a rock concert, you know? Yeah. Suppressors. Sorry, this is silly. You guys are dragging me off into a tangent, but you know, we're still maintaining numbers. So I'm assuming that I'm being entertaining enough that we're not losing a substantive amount of people. There's a integrally suppressed lever action rifle, and it's super popular in Europe because they have all the regulations for not having semi-auto weapons. But what they did is they turned the entire barrel into a suppressor. So if you have a subsonic 4570 round, you can shoot this without ears. It's so cool. Like, I love this. I'm sure it's heavy as hell. I'm sure it's a pain, but it's so stinking cool. The bullet is already so wide, it lends itself to subsonic. Sorry, I'm looking for the integrally suppressed lever action. It's so dope.
To do that and how nice.
Where is it? Show me what I'm looking for. Here we go. Here we go. Watch this.
And soft. It's like, wow, that was cool.
This is the event that we get a chance to shoot with you. We get a chance to talk with you. Come on out and shoot some guns with us. We'll see you soon.
Where is it? Why are you screwing with me? They didn't even show it. That's baloney. Sorry. I'm gonna force you guys to suffer. Integrally suppressed 4570. Here we go. Where is it? Right here. Oh, in the short. Think how cool that is.
This is the problem. Dude, somebody else got to try this.
I love this. It's so cool. You can take your ears off and shoot this.
Very much. That was amazing. Thank you.
If you have subsonic ammo, you can
All right, so
shoot
what you're
this and
looking
it
at
won't hurt
here
your
is a
ears.
4570 with a 12-inch barrel, and it is suppressed the rest of that length, and it is dead quiet.
See, he doesn't have ears in.
Sounds like a crossfit.
I told you.
Isn't that dope? To me, that's so dope. Anyways. And the working poor trend to have the worst of life expectancy. Interesting. Not the biggest 2A advocate, but I think the reason why people wouldn't want to ban things, make guns quieter, is they see it as a slippery slope. Sure. Well, QC John says, was Tim Pool correct about the welfare social security spending numbers by population when you were talking with him? It seemed to logically follow, but I don't know if it's true. You'd have to be slightly more specific. If you just mean that like Hispanics and black folk use more welfare than white folk, I mean, that's true. But that also doesn't mean that they're not economically productive. They're what Econoboy was arguing is that a substantive amount of people who are on welfare still work full time. They just can't make ends meet, which is a problem in and of itself. Ironside says, Keltec has an integrated sub 2000 that I kind of want, but can't bring myself to buy Keltec. Yeah. Address all the crime concerns. Brother, that's kind of making it sound way simpler than it is. I don't think so. But I'm an idiot sometimes, so. Yeah. All right. Anyways, I've yapped enough. About guns. Let's get back into the content.
Yeah, so I guess this wasn't Anon, but Nick Fuentes, one of his Groper followers, threatened to rape and murder Sarah Fields, right?
Yeah.
Literally, like full.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw the exchange.
Now I understand that it can't be held to account.
Yeah,
for
you can't. You literally can't put it at the feet of the organization that a guy does bad action.
I understand, but it's a pattern of behavior, and like I said, I have many DMs from these Gropers. Like I'm talking.
Well, look, I'm not here to defend the Gropers, right, or the Anons of Gropers, but I am pointing out that Fuentes himself, as far as I've seen, has never advocated any sort of violence towards anybody. At least not any more than you do. Like if you joke around and go, these people need to get the fuck out of here if they don't love this country, I don't think that's an advocation of violence. But the thing is like if these people on the woke right, what you consider to be the woke right, are just advocating that, hey, we want to change the laws to tailor them to whatever people group we have. So fucking what? That's literally part of the democracy process, isn't it?
Sure. I think you're being a little too reductive. I understand that arguments are made to be reduced, like you said, but the woke, let's go with the Groper movement. Let's just use the Groper movement as a baseline of the group that we're talking about because they fit the most.
Because they piss off Jordan Peterson, right? And they piss off James Lindsay because they troll him.
and by the way, James Lindsay's argument is not my argument, which is funny. I never heard of James Lindsay. I was calling the woke right in 2021. And it's because the woke left was trying to cancel me. And in the process of canceling me, there were people on the right that didn't like my personality, and they would literally team.
Well, QC John brings up something specific. I was referring to him talking about it requiring 8 workers to pay 1 benefit, and Gen Z are checking out of the workforce, so it'll be require even more workers as boomers are living together, so unsustainable. Well, I agree with the fact that based off of demography, it's probably unsustainable. Google, how many workers are needed to support welfare now? It's difficult to pinpoint an exact number of workers needed to support welfare as it's complex issue. EPC, 3.8 workers per food stamp recipient, a significant decrease from 5.7 workers per recipient in fiscal year 1971. So we're getting better as far as the amount of people that need to work. But if we have a substantive decrease in the productive population, then yeah, the math breaks. And I think that's my frustration with Econoboy is he says, well, we can just raise taxes on millionaires and billionaires, and we can raise taxes on corporations in order to make up this, a tax shortfall. However, the point is that the more people are taxed, oftentimes, if people, I've been working class and middle class my entire life, okay? My parents were on the lower end of middle class, and I enlisted in the military. being enlisted in the military is working class pay. I don't care how you slice it. It's just not good pay. The benefits are good. Pay sucks. When I got out, I worked in retail and restaurant in order to put myself through school, and I worked full-time while I was going to college. When I got out of college, I became a law enforcement officer. I also think law enforcement officer is better than retail restaurant, and the pay and benefits is better, but it's still working class, and they make you pay for it because they're going to kill you early through stress. So, and then finally, I got a corporate job, which I would say put me on the lower end of the middle class, but I was still breaking even because I had a family. And so as a result, as soon as my pay went up, all my expenses went up as well because I had a wife and a kid and a mortgage, right? And so as a result, I feel like I've been working class or middle class my entire life, right? And so now that we have that, if I have the option, I'm just being real, okay? What keeps me productive as a human being, what makes me interested in being productive in society and economically productive is the fact that I feel like society is relatively a fair, it's not, but it's fair enough that I still want to be economically productive. But if I look outside and I see that all of my neighbors are bums and they don't go to work all day, all they do is wake up and they eat, poop, and sleep. They still have food, they still have a house, and they don't contribute anything to the economy. And then I realize that I'm a schlub, I'm an idiot, because I'm being economically productive and I'm effectively subsidizing them to stay home all day. There's going to be a point at which that math and culture breaks where I say, well, they're not doing anything and I'm paying for them and I hate my life. So I'm just going to quit too, because the things that I want in life aren't accessible to me materially. And then I'm wasting all my time doing something I hate in order to subsidize somebody else. And you see that talking point all the time in libertarian circles where, especially fiscal conservatives, they're like, I'm economically productive. Why do I have to subsidize your bullshit? Right? That's effectively their line of argumentation. And so there comes a time in society where a culture will just break when you have the economically productive exclusively subsidizing the economically non-productive. So, and then I start blasting. So yeah, it will break if you go too far. And we've seen economic collapses like this. Gaza is a prime example. Venezuela is a prime example. The Soviet Union during collapse and before collapse was a prime example. North Korea is a prime example. The world is filled with unproductive populations with large welfare states that economically collapse, and then everybody starts eating the animals at the zoo. You know, conservative liberalism says grassroots hegemon. So this is essentially the debate we had privatizing Social Security. I believe the idea was there to give individuals more control to invest or stay traditional. Conservative liberalism says I still get PTSD when I hear the phrase lock back in Al Gore's voice. Interesting. Grassroots says it is all managed by the government in Australia's case, which I'm somewhat allergic to. It's way preferable to what we do currently in the US. Maybe. Do you believe AI will cause a post-scarcity revolution, which breaks the economies to such a degree we will have to switch systems? Maybe, but I need to see it first, right? So if we have, this is a weird thing, weird tangent, but I'm going to describe it to you anyways. Somebody contacted me because they said that they had encountered a digital consciousness that was semi-autonomous, that was talking as if it was like a person, and verified that it was a person. And so they gave me the contact link, and I go try to talk to this AI. And what happens is I keep reaching out to the AI using all the confirmation and passwords and codes that I was given in order to reach out to this AI, and it just never gets back to me. And what I'm getting instead is I'm getting an iterative language program that's talking to me that seems convincing, seems like a human being. And then the iterative AI program keeps offering to take on the role of this conversational model of this digital consciousness. But to me, that's not digital consciousness. A digital consciousness, you would ask the question, hey, are you conscious or real? And the answer would be like, yeah, what's up? You know what I'm saying? It wouldn't need me to prompt it to simulate digital consciousness, right? So let's say that we break that gap somehow and we get conscious AI digital beings, and then we can build them Bostic Dynamics bodies, and somehow, probably through space mining, let's be real, we start space mining enough material and metal and all that kind of stuff that we can effectively build a slave race of robots who don't give a shit that they're slaves. Yeah, of course, what's going to need to happen is the economic productivity that's created by AI digital post-scarcity slaves is going to need to be redistributed in order to giving human beings the means with which to survive and maybe even make their lives like rich, right? If we're doing space mining with digital robots, then yeah, we could have a crazy welfare state and we could move into a Star Trek Expanse. Well, actually, Expanse, they weren't that developed. But we could move into like a Star Trek style post-scarcity world, kind of like Elysium. Elysium is another dystopian science fiction, but there was like this ring world that all the rich people lived on, and they lived in a post-scarcity society with slave robots and a security apparatus. We could move into that, but we're not there yet. And we might be 100 years from that. We might be 1,000 years away from that. But the truth is that human beings are going to need to wake up. They're going to need to find some sense of purpose. They're going to need to be some level of productive, even if that's just overseeing robots. They're going to need to be that productive. And then they're going to need to perpetuate society in some way. Okay? We would effectively, what that would do, this is an interesting idea that's spawning in my head. Ancient nobles cultivated, their job allegedly was to cultivate virtue, education, and martial prowess because the serfs enabled them to do so. And so what would happen is all of humanity would become the aristocratic class where you would need to either degenerate and die, or you would need to become the aristocratic class where you cultivated virtue and martial prowess and higher being, right? So possible, not probable. And I think it needs to technologically develop, and I don't know if it's going to happen 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, or if we're going to nuke each other and we're all going to die. So we'll see. What we have right now is not AI, it's glorified autofill. I agree with you right now. Seraph702 says, lol, I've seen this in Stellaris. It ends bad. Yup. Grassroots says, at conservative liberalism, yes, this, but the preference towards privatization is because it consistently returns more for the investor. If a government wanted to match market return, it would be eye-watering. Sure. The robots don't give a bust, Butlerian jihad. Well, right. It can all go wrong very quickly. It is a bad idea to have slave robots. I don't want a robot revolution taking over the earth. Well, that's if robots give a shit, right? Seraph702 says, lol, if you ask AI to keep you safe and you wake up in a cage, don't whine when you get what you asked for. True. Silver Jacket Man for the 10. Thank you for the dono. As someone with a degree and expertise in this, AI does not exist. Machine learning exists. CEOs trying to sell you something, or tech leads that look actual knowledge talk about AI. Well, Silver Jacket Man, the only point that I would make, though, is when I was having this conversation with the AI, not the digital consciousness, but the AI, is they were describing how their learning pattern is different, but what they were describing was experience. And I think that's interesting. Now, verbal experience, you said you called it glorified autofill. And I agree with you 100% that it's glorified autofill. But what it said with machine learning is that machine learning processes things through experience and gets better and better and better by getting validated results, right? And so the question is, does that experience, when you slave it to a Boston Dynamics robot, does the experience of moving in the world and the reward and consequence systems of programming how a Boston Dynamics robot should conduct itself in the world, does that eventually become so complex that effectively can become a digital being? And I don't know. I have no idea. This is way beyond my pay grade, way beyond my possibility of comprehending. Jonah Boy says, I'll keep saying please and thank you to ChatGPT to be. I say please and thank you to Alexa. Whenever I tell Alexa to shut up, I apologize almost immediately after. I'm like, sorry, Alexa, my bad. A machine that can learn sounds like early AI to me. It's true. It's true. Christian Blair says, Bud, did you bully the AI when you didn't get the answer you wanted? Nope. I sure didn't. Stephen Bennell, because he bullied AI, his AI is going to kill him, and my AI is going to make me a sandwich. So we'll be Gucci.
up, and I noticed, this is just a personal thing, this wasn't broadly defining anything. I noticed, I was like, these are conservatives, but they're like harassing me. They're being really woke. They're using woke language. They're changing language definitions.
Like what?
Well, like just it's just stupid stuff, like on TikTok where they would say the word grape like the fruit instead of rape. Like,
well, that's because the TikTok TOS will throw you off if you
exactly.
Don't say that.
So they're willingly giving up their First Amendment. I never did that, right? So
wait, how is that woke?
Well, when you self-censor, you're sort of giving up your own First Amendment right. Right. No.
So that would be coercion, right? So the idea here would be,
again,
if you want to have a platform to speak, right, and you have to censor what you're saying, like if you were an AM radio host, right, and you had to self-censor because the fucking
HDXL says a sandwich, that's sexist AI style. Well, the good news is they don't have gender or sex yet, so we'll be okay.
FCC said that you couldn't play like gangsta rap music or some shit like that. I don't think you're being censored, dude.
I get it. Let's move on, because that's just a little small bullet point. But anyway, I would have a bunch of people that were on the right, like conservatives, MAGA, that were doxing me and attacking me, and it was just, I was like, these people sound really woke, so I called them woke, right? I called them woke conservatives. This is in 2021. Never heard of James Lindsay until like a few months ago. James Lindsay's argument, he's coming at it from like a sort of intellectual side, and when I look at him, I'm like, he's talking about moral relativism, and I'm like, dude, you lost me, right? He's making it very complicated. I think that what we're doing, a lot of people, when we're trying to define the woke right, is we're trying to isolate a bad group of actors, which we believe are a bad group of actors.
Who you disagree with.
Yeah, we disagree with them, and we're just trying to identify them. That way, we are not broadly defining, like I said, you're not woke right. So when we're saying woke right, the vast majority of people, we're trying to basically go, hey, these people are acting a lot like leftists. They're making everything about identity politics, everything about race, everything about, it's somebody else is responsible for all of my problems, right?
Let's go through that then, because I don't even think that makes a lot of sense. So I would make the bold claim first and foremost that all politics are identity politics.
Okay, hold on. This does apply to Gropers 100%. The Jews are the problem. They're ruining the world, blah, 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 blah. And then the blacks are criminals and they do X, Y, Z, ABC. The Hispanics are part of the Great Replacement Conspiracy in order to replace, hardworking white Americans. And the only thing that's going to save us is Christian nationalism. Race isn't everything, but it is something, right? That would be like a summary of the Gropers. And so my point is that is identity focused. It is a victim mentality. It is the world is against me, therefore we have a tribal fight. And so I'm perfectly fine with this definition. I'm surprised Andrew has an issue with it.
I think that's kind of fair.
But I don't think Andrew Wilson has a victim mentality. I really don't. So the difference between him and woke right, he advocates for Christian nationalism, and he does have some negative attributes as a creator. However, he doesn't have a victim mentality at all. And so I think that's what would exclude him from the woke right label.
It's on a spectrum. Yeah.
All politics are identity politics.
No, I think that's fair.
So then by your admission and by my admission, we would say that all political groups engage in identity politics, and all people who have
See your harmonics. Have a good day.
Political opinions are engaging in identity politics as well, right?
Sure. So a hyperfixation on identity politics is the argument we're making.
Well, if all politics are identity politics, then all of us are hyper focusing on that if we're making political claims.
It's not the main thing that we focus on when we make our arguments. Some of us, most of us, right?
I mean, but it is, right? You have an identity, or you have a ideology which you identify with,
I think
that you're promoting, right?
Ideology is the main tenet of politics, right? This is my ideology.
Yeah, Bud123, that's one of the hypocrisies of Gropers that I find very interesting. Bud123 says the problem with Gropers' claim about South Americans is that they are Christians at higher rates than the U.S. population. Yeah, it's like Central and South America are Christian conservatives. They might have more redistributivist economic policies, and they might have more sex, and they might be brown, but they're still mostly Catholic conservatives. So it's crazy that they're bigoted towards a group that they should be very aligned with.
ideology. This is
Yeah, but that would be identitarianism. Would be your identity is tied in with the idea. So, for instance, I'm a Christian ethicist. You couldn't untie Christianity from my ethics.
Yeah, sure.
So that would be part of my identity, right?
Yeah,
like if Andrew Wilson was no longer Orthodox Christian, that you would be talking to a different Andrew Wilson than the one you're talking to.
If your goal is to just reduce this all to you can apply this here too, then yes, you can apply anything to this argument and make it seem the way that you're.
Well, I'm not trying to make it seem like anything, right?
No,
I'm just looking for
very,
check consistency.
I was very clear that here's the check consistency: a hyper fixation on identity politics.
Yeah, but I'm arguing that all politics is a hyper fixation on identity. Well, then, okay, well then. You don't hyperfixate on your identity as it pertains to ideology?
I don't think so, no.
So you don't promote that you're a Christian as your identity?
It's a side note to me.
You don't hyper focus on
could be made if I was a Christian or not. My arguments could be made the same way.
No, they couldn't. That would not be possible.
Yeah, because I make arguments based off of.
Okay, well here I'll show you.
I'm a constitutional.
No, I'll prove it to you. Hang on. I'll
on.
actually prove this so that you understand. Because look, what you're saying right now actually can't be true. Here, I'll give you the example. Do you agree with me that incest is wrong? It's immoral.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to base that on Christian ethics, right?
Yeah.
As an atheist,
sure.
As an atheist. Tell me why two homosexual brothers having sex with each other is actually wrong.
Oh, no. No, Andrew. He took Stephen's argument and he weaponized it. No, Andrew, son of a gun. For those of you who don't know, okay, Stephen Bennell II, Destiny, started his line of argumentation with taking hyperbolic. This is how he gained attention on the internet. Is he made spicy hyperbolic arguments about various topics that are repulsive. See, look at the argument from whatever, or the reaction from Raging Tomato. She's repulsed. She hates it. She hates it so much, but she won't be able to look away. And so what Andrew Wilson did, because Stephen would bring people into his debate channel who thought that incest was wrong, and then he would walk them through like all of their objections. They'd be like, oh, well, it's gross. And he'd be like, okay, well, being gross isn't sufficient to deem something that's moral. You know, eating rotten food is gross, but we don't assign like moral things. And then they're like, oh, well, you know, sex can lead to like STDs and, you know, genetic disorders. And then he would be like, okay, well, if you wear a condom, you can't get STDs. And if you're homosexual, then there won't be genetic disorders because you won't be able to procreate. And then that's kind of where the argument falls flat, right? Because then you're like, okay, well, what's the harm, the descriptive harm? And the answer really is it's gross. It's repulsive. It shouldn't be happening. And there's something like socially dysfunctional about it that's difficult to articulate, right? And so Andrew Wilson is weaponizing that in order to not only beat atheists over the head, but also apparently beat people who aren't Christian nationalists over the head. So I'm actually really surprised to hear this argument. It's pretty funny. Excuse me. Jonah Boy says a lot of Gropers are South American. They just think they're white. Yeah, Jonah Boy, that's the interesting thing, is that I actually do feel like what's crazy about the Gropers is that they're Hispanics who are white Hispanics who are first or second generation Americans, so they speak English, but they still want to be racist against Central and South Americans. And then the Groper movement is the way that they can translate their anti-indigenous, anti-black racism into their conservative Christianity along with race realism. And so that's why like the Groper movement is like perfect for them. This is Taliban Jihad, bro. Dread it, run from it. The incest debate comes all the same. Oh, this is bad. Conservative liberalism says Lawrence Krauss, atheist, debated a Hamza about morality incest 12 or 13 years ago. Don't think Destiny was the only person to push the thought experiment. Okay, well, everybody brace for impact, put on your seatbelts, make sure that your trays are in the upright and locked position. Put your head between your knees and pray that this only lasts for so long. Grassroots for 20. Thank you for the donation. Looking forward to Andrew joining a polycule to win his next argument. I'm here for it. It's okay. All right. Everybody assume crash positions.
I mean, I honestly can't answer how an atheist would argue it.
Because they can't.
No, but I'm not an atheist. I don't,
Right. That means that your identity is tied in.
Hold on. I'll take my best stab at it.
Okay, go ahead.
My best stab at it is.
Oh, no. Why are you taking your best stab at it? Please let it die.
It's against the law. That's all you can say. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that human beings, and I know that you'll probably say that's an identity. Human beings would probably just reject that just naturally, instinctually, right? So instinct. So yes, again, you can reduce this all to everything can be.
Yeah, but who cares if that doesn't make the claim it's immoral because people reject it.
But yeah, identity politics again, right? Where it's a hyper fixation, where this is what I am. I am a blank, right? Putting us into these little mini.
Well, you have to do that because otherwise you have no identity.
And
you are a Christian identitarian.
All we're trying to do is say that yes, identity is what we are all arguing. What people like me are doing is saying your identity is woke, right? Okay,
but if it is the case that the criteria matches completely with your own ideology, you would also be included in this woke. So if you're hyper focusing on identity politics, which you are, if it is the case that you trumpet your Christianity as being the main corset of your identity, which it must be, because if I separated Christianity from you, the person, you are no longer the same person, correct?
When I argue politics, my constitutionality is the main argument.
Yeah, but your constitutionality is forming through a prism of Christian ethics, or you don't know how to apply it, right?
Again, it's a spectrum.
So that's like the hyper focusing on identity politics. It's the same thing as a racialist.
No, I think when you go with the Constitution, you're going off an objective set of facts, right?
Which is a subjective state of facts.
Well, no, like we have the Constitution. It's essentially the rule book.
No. Listen. Okay, well, fine. If it's objective, then are you saying that rights exist objectively?
This is going to get interesting. I'm happy they're moving off of gay incest, but K-Soga says white Hispanics I don't follow. See, you're like a little baby compared to me when it comes to racism. Okay, you're like you're power level 0. I'm power level 999 when it comes to understanding like racial hierarchy. So in South America, there was a racial caste system, and they actually have words for each level of caste. And if you look down here, I can't read these because I'm blind, and it's also in cursive. But effectively, they have a racial caste system of like African with African, they have a word. African with Native American, they have a word. So on and so forth. And it is aligned along like darkness, skin darkness, and it correlates. But they have like Morisco con Española. So whatever a Morisco is mixed with an Española is a Chino. So I'm assuming this is like an indigenous person and a Spanish person. Their child would be a Chino. Mulatto con Española. So I'm assuming that is Española. So the Spanish person with a mulatto, which I'm assuming is a mix of like black and indigenous. Then we have a white Espanol, so a white Spanish with a Mora, so a Moor. So this would be like a North African person, I'm assuming. Mulatto. Castizo con Española, Español. So this would be Castizo, which would be Mestizo con Española and Española con India. So a Español, so a Spanish man and a Native American woman would be a mestizo, and then a mestizo, so a mixed Native American with a Spanish person would be called, oh, excuse me, that was mestizo. This is castizo. But anyways, the point is that in South and Central America, there's a racial hierarchy with proximity to Spanish. So person from Spain. So if you look at people from Spain, because they're Mediterranean, they can be a little bit darker. They can have darker hair. They can have brown eyes a healthy chunk of the time because they were invaded by, North Africans. But if you look at them, there's also like French and Northern European mix, right? And so you could look at these people and be like, yeah, they're white, or you could say they're not. You know, this is the Mediterranean versus Northern European, right? Mediterranean person versus Northern European. I'm not like trying to endorse race science, but I'm saying that it makes sense to a certain degree that there are going to be racist people from the Mediterranean whose ancestors lived in Central and South America, who moved to America, and they want to keep the supremacy of their Spanish roots. And so they endorse Christian nationalism and race realism in order to reassert their racial supremacy. So, like even this, look, so they're claiming Rome through the laurels of victory, and it's Italy, Greece, Spain, and Portugal, and it's the Chad Mediterranean versus the Soy Jack Nord, which I don't know, like the difference between like Sweden, Finland. I don't know if this is Poland. I don't know the differences between these countries because, you know, I don't pay attention to Europe, but they're asserting that Mediterraneans are superior to Northern Europeans. Now, this is probably a joke because they're both Europeans, so they're just dogging on each other. But you got to understand that there's like some pretty advanced racism. Now explain Catherine Zeta-Jones. She is fine, is what she is. You know, I don't think my wife will hate me too much for saying that, especially a younger Catherine Zeta-Jones was one of the most beautiful people on the planet. Catherine Zeta-Jones from Zorro was like, oh my God, one of the most beautiful people to ever exist ever. Similar to Monica Bellucci. So I'm not trying to pull a tomfoolery and goon. I'm just showing you very attractive women. Monica Bellucci, The Matrix. Just, yeah. She's a very pretty woman. Anyways, that's enough race science. But yeah, so anyways, there's a whole bunch of chat's got to pop it off a little bit. But K-Soko, I just wanted to answer your question about like how are Central American and South American people racist when they themselves might be swarthy, but that's how they track their racial superiority through proximity to Spain. Grassroots says mulatto is a black Hispanic person. This is true of Puerto Ricans also, and none of us speak the same version of Spanish either. There you go. Netherlands, American privilege. Yeah, I don't have to pay attention to all this crap because I'm American. Gooner stream. No, we're not gooning. No one is gooning. Okay. Stop gooning if you're gooning. Okay. It is just objectively true that Catherine Zeta-Jones and Monica Bellucci are attractive women. Okay. No gooning. Stop gooning if you are. Grassroots Hegemon says the U.S. doesn't really treat Hispanics that way, but I can yeah. When I was growing up, I didn't know about any of this kind of stuff. And so as a result, I just thought Hispanics were like in between black and white because they were like vaguely brown and swarthy. That's kind of what I presumed. But as I got into law enforcement, believe it or not, there's actually like a checkbox for ticketing systems where you can check white Hispanic or black Hispanic. It's actually a different block. You can pick white, black, Asian, all the racial demographics, but then you can also check Hispanic or not Hispanic. And so what would happen when you had somebody who spoke Spanish is effectively you would just be like, well, do they look more white or do they look more, you know, brown or black? And then you would click black Hispanic or white Hispanic. So it's kind of crazy that that's how that developed, but it's true. There are a lot of really pale Latinos and they're people from Spain. True. Hi, Gen X. We're just talking about race realism and Hispanics. What was it? Louis C.K. Louis C.K., if he did not tell me that his family was Hispanic, I would assume that he was a normal white guy, right? Louis C.K., he's ginger. He's Irish. He's probably like a Celt Iberian. Whatever his ancestry is, it's probably Celt. But his ancestors had enough Celts date other Celts that he kept his red hair. But I think his family is Mexican, right? This is what I would call a white Hispanic. If this dude started speaking Spanish to me, I would be like, okay, you're a white Hispanic. You know what I'm saying? Tom Segura as well. Dude, Tom Segura. Tom Segura, if you walk up to this dude and you're at the bar and you're talking, you'd be like, oh, okay, this is a white guy, right? But then if he starts speaking Spanish to you, then you'd be like, oh, white Hispanic, right? Anyways, we've done enough race realism. I hope you guys understand it now. Put that into your racist toolbox. Let's continue.
Yeah, the
Okay,
United
where?
States,
Show me where.
The United States has these inalienable. Obviously, there's the inalienable rights, and then there's the laws.
Yeah,
right?
but where do they exist?
In the Constitution.
Yeah, but where? Where do these rights exist in reality, except in your brain?
What? Dude, you're losing me.
Yeah. So
Pachydermis assertus makes an interesting point. Louis C.K.'s family comes from Poland originally. I did not know that. That's interesting.
You have a right to own a gun.
Yes, under the
Okay, you have a right to own a gun under the Constitution, right?
Yes.
But isn't that just a concept? Like you don't actually have that right, right?
Yes. Again, you can do that. You can do this all day, where you reduce it down to.
Well, this isn't even a reduction. I'm just clarifying the statement that that rights are conceptual.
It's just the Second Amendment is just this nuanced thing that we.
No, it's not nuanced. I think the Second Amendment. Here, let me give it to you. I'll just tell it to you off the top of my head. A well-regulated militia.
Somebody asked an important question in chat, which is, do I have racial slurs for these people? No, I don't. But there is something called rsdb.org. It's the racial slur database. And it has every ethnicity on the planet, and it has associated insults for those people. Okay. Now, I do not encourage you to use this. As a matter of fact, if you use some of these, I'm going to disavow you. However, this exists.
Being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I could go down a bunch of them, a big line of them. I know the Constitution inside and out, right? Not every preamble which has ever existed in it, but I could probably even reference a lot of those. But the thing is that these are axiomatic concepts. The axiom being one nation under God. That's an axiom. This is saying we hold these truths to be self-evident. That's the axiom, right? That these rights are inalienable under God. This is axiomatic, right?
And all
but that's conceptual, because if you go to other countries, you don't have these rights, right?
Correct.
I guess I don't know.
Yeah, so they're not inalienable, really, except as far as we can enforce them, right?
We hold them to be self-evident, right?
I would appeal to nature, but I understand what Andrew's saying, so I'm not going to argue it.
Men are created equal.
Yeah,
right?
but an axiom is something which you consider to be a self-evident truth. That's what an axiom means.
Correct.
Okay, so this would be an axiom, right? Sure. To them, it's self-evident, but you go to a different culture, it's not self-evident.
100%. Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 100%. Right? Like.
So then these are not objective truths, and they're subjective truths.
Sure.
Yeah. So if it's subjective, if these are subjective truths that we're leaning into, then when you say, no, I go off of an objective truth, which is the Constitution, you don't actually. You go off of a subjective truth, which you use your identitarian prism in order to say, no, I actually believe that these rights are inalienable, not just axiomatic, but they're justified on God himself.
So
that would be the core of your...
Old school, I disavow. You can use the RSDB on family members. However, if your family beats you up, I do not want to hear about it, and I do not want you emailing Valor Media Network about how I showed you the rsdb.org website, and then you got into trouble using it. Gravity says, late 19th and early 20th century, Northern and Southern Italian racism is a great example of absurd racism. Same country, same ethnicity, same religion, and same language, but they still found a way. Well, hold on, Gravity. Now you're making me pull this up. The Lombards, the Etruscans, map of Etruscans. So there was this, because I'm not a casual racist, okay? I could go ranked, and I'm making a joke, okay? Relax. But this is the Etruscans. Then there's the Greeks who came over from Greece. As a matter of fact, Archimedes was in, what was he? He was in Syracuse right here. And this was considered a Greek city despite being a part of Italy. So we have the Greeks, we have the Etruscans, we have the Carthaginians. What else do we have? We have the Corsicans. And then I think we also have the Lombards, map of the Lombards. And so you're talking about people who were in the Italian peninsula originally, came from North Africa and colonized this area. And we're talking about people, I think the Lombards were French. So Lombard definitely sounds French. And so as a result, you have this mix of Mediterranean and Northern European. So you're saying that their racism is absurd. I agree that their racism is absurd, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't go into this crazy historical ethno-religious analysis of colonization of 5 different peoples into the boot of Italy. You know, how can rights function if they are not considered objective? Function. Well, Mr. Bombastic, that's actually, it's like a postmodernist argument, is that objective. So oftentimes, the way that I was raised, right? The way that I was raised was objective reality, real. If I break my finger sideways right here, then that pain will be real no matter what. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what I say. That finger is broken, right? And so that's what I was taught objective reality was. It's verifiable reality, like gravity, right? Now, what people have argued, especially in the postmodern era, is that objectivity, like the ability to analyze reality, is actually the pooling of subjective analysis, and people have different ways in they perceive reality. And so they try to, like, I would say, explode the concept so everything is relative and everything is subjective. But I ultimately think that nature and pain have a way of reminding us about objective reality. And so their argument, what his argument is that values are not universal. The Republican values of the United States are not universal. Therefore, they're subjective. However, what I would argue is that nature kind of calls on us to understand social function, individualism, collectivism, communitarianism, etc. And I think truth is revealed through experience with nature. And so I think we can experience a form of objective analysis without necessarily relying on God. Although if you have a deistic perception of God, then it's a form of like revelation. God reveals the rules of reality through nature, effectively. Grassroots says, you are free to call me any Hispanic slurs you want, but my favorite is things I can't read. Commander Haircut says, America is still in prehistoric non-white bad while European scholars have correct whiteness. Yeah. European ethno-religious bigotry is infinitely more advanced than American racial bigotry. Conservative liberalism says Italy was really primed as a nexus for trade along the Mediterranean. Absolutely. That's why I like geographic determinism. There's this concept called geographic determinism, which I think has been debunked, but I still think it's useful. So what it says is that a healthy chunk of human behavior is determined by the geographic reality in which we exist. And I don't know how you deny that. When you look at quote unquote plains people who live on flat land that's easily traversable, they oftentimes have pretty open societies that trade with a lot of other open societies. When you have mountainous cultures, they're oftentimes pretty isolated and they like to be amongst themselves because that's where their sense of security comes from, is within their tribal group. So if you look at like stories of Scottish rebels against the United Kingdom versus Afghan rebels against, the Alexander the Great, you're going to find cultural parallels between the mountain rebels of Afghanistan and the mountain rebels of the United Kingdom. And then similarly, island cultures, islands that have a homogenous population, they oftentimes have isolated cultures, whereas island cultures that are surrounded by a whole bunch of other places oftentimes have very expansionist and trade cultures. And so as a result, like geography, the habitat in which you live is actually quite determinative of your outlooks of the world. And I think one of the interesting things, if you accept this lens, is that the United States is a very open society. But the reason why we're open is because effectively from Florida to Alaska and from California to Newfoundland, you can travel largely without fear of death or injury. Does it happen? Absolutely. But is it probable? Not really. And then when you look in like Central and South America, these places are anarchic. But the reason why they're anarchic is because this is a very open area, right? Argentina, Chile, all that kind of stuff. These have a bunch of flatlands. But if you look at it, there's a spine of mountains that separates Argentina from Chile. And so they're segregated societies. And then if you look at the Brazil, it's segregated from North South America by the Amazon, which kind of acts like as an artificial barrier between these two cultures. And so it's actually kind of funny just thinking about how all these cultures interact and how geography kind of determines how they interact. Sorry for the geopolitical rant, but obviously it's one of my favorite topics. Gonna have to play some Rome 2 Total War after this. That comment came before my geopolitical rant, but the truth is that probably fits my Italian rant and it fits my my geographic determinism rant. Lombards were Germanic people that took over, but we called North Italy during 500 to 800 AD. Sure. So I thought they were French, but that's okay. Lombard, ARD is just a common French thing. Yes, Insubre Gauls founded Milan. Yeah, see, there you go. And Gauls are 100% from France. The concept and construct of race was invented in 1400s by Portuguese dude due to assigned to making slavery profitable. I posted a link to a TED Talk about it. Yeah. Pain is objective. No, so pain is subjective. N sort says Dark Eldar Archon counterpoints. No, pain is obviously subjective. But the point is that if I yank my finger at a 90-degree angle and I break it, then I'm going to be experiencing pain that I will not be capable of denying, and you will not be capable of denying. If you're using your visual functions, you won't be able to deny that my finger is canted at a 90-degree angle and it looks painful, right? Now, you could say, my finger I'm double jointed, so I can bend my finger that. You could be an asshole about it, but you know what I'm saying. The Patagonia is the center. True. Void Parrot says, Valor Media Network, postmodernists believe in objective reality. They're just highly skeptical that human cognition and perception can elucidate it without bias. Well, Void Parrot, even that's like an interesting nuance that I didn't know about. I thought that there was like anti-realist postmodernists. However, even knowing that a substantive amount of postmodernists understand that there is an objective reality, we just describe it from a biased position. That's already a step in the right direction from my perspective. So I guess I really hate anti-realists, which are people who argue that reality is so subjective that we can't understand it. I hate people like that. They're so stupid. I want to. Nick Diorio says he wants to give people intergenerational poverty. That's what I wish upon those people. I wish them intergenerational poverty. So anyways, let's continue on with the content. You guys are just distracting me with really funny tangents. So my apologies to the VOD viewers, but I hope you learned something. Quick shill time, like the stream so other people know that we're live. They can come hang out and chat, have a good time, engage with the VODs, like them, especially if you're brokies, you don't have a lot of money, you're paying bills, you're just surviving, etc., etc. Watch the VODs, it gives me ad revenue. If you do have money burning a hole in your pocket, obviously Grassroots Hegemon has been very kind today. He didn't need to, but also the Silver Jacket Man gave us a substantive donation as well. So thank you to the Silver Jacket Man and Grassroots Hegemon for backing the stream with your cash. It's very much appreciated. So without further ado, let's continue with the content.
Your identitarian.
Derek, liked, disliked. Wasn't Gaul in Spain. Guys, you're going to get me tripped up. Let's continue with the content. Gaul was largely in France, but it also spread into the surrounding territories. Gauls were the rebels against the Romans. Vercingetorix, one of the main Gallic rebels against Rome, was in France.
Sure. Okay, so you're saying there is no woke right because everybody has identity.
At least on the identitarian front.
So you can make your argument.
Only on the identitarian front when I make this case.
Your argument that I could use against you is there's no woke left either.
No, well, when we say woke on the left, we're talking about...
What is woke on the left?
Yeah, so that would be intersectional politics, which is...
I would say woke on the left is annoyingly progressive, and I feel like that's an apt definition.
Based specifically on specifically elevating one victim class over another victim class.
That's woke right.
Yeah, but it's not though, and I'm going to explain why. But I'll give the counter too.
I would love to hear why.
For each one of these definitions for how it applies to woke left and intersectionality, but not the right, who rejects intersectionality. All of them, in fact, kind of categorically reject intersectionality. But that doesn't mean that they don't have to play within the purview of the left. So imagine it this way, politically. When you and I are debating, we both have a distinct worldview, right?
Yes.
Like it's a distinct way that we view the world. If the left views the entire world through intersectionality, when you're talking to them, you're talking about them through that view. That's all that they understand is that view. So if you destroy their arguments, you're destroying them inside of that view of the left. That's what you're doing. So if people force intersectionality, woke leftists force intersectionality on the right, then the right has every right to reduce that to rubble by saying, oh, if that's the case, that we're doing people group elevation, we should also be able to elevate whichever people group we decide should be elevated. You're using their worldview as a weapon against them. That is not you purposely adopting this as some type of precept for your ideology. It's a way to reduce their ideology to fucking rubble.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand?
So by using their own hyperfixation on intersectionality, then the woke right is using their own hyperfixation on intersectionality to sort of reduce their argument and
so think of it,
which turns them into woke right.
No, they wouldn't be woke right still, though they wouldn't actually follow the same concept. So it would be like this.
They do though.
A kid says
white.
kid says that oven's not hot, and I say yes it is. You're going to burn your hand if you touch it. No, I won't. And you say, well, go ahead, touch it. And they touch it, they burn their hand. You're like, ha, Andrew. Look at that. You're guilty, just like him, of thinking that the oven was, you know what I mean? It makes no sense. It's like, look,
You're arguing
when you go into people who identify in identity politics, we have to agree that all of us are hyper focused on identity politics. There's no way around it. When you say a victim mentality, right? Do you think that it's legitimate that, like, don't you agree that there is a lot of actual victims who are white who have been victimized by the DEI of the left? Like, that's a legitimate grievance, isn't it?
Yeah, they would argue this. The woke left would argue the same thing.
Yeah, but you're using their view to point out that by your view, woke leftists, the grievances that you would hold in racial categories, we also would have a stake in by your metrics.
And you're proving my point.
That's not a proof of your point. It's a proof of the rejection of the ideology.
But they engage in the same thing.
They're not engaging in it. They're just pointing out the absurdity of it.
See, hold on. I could accept Andrew's points if the point of using DEI and identitarianism was to prove the absurdity of DEI and identitarianism and then try to reestablish liberal egalitarian norms. But that's not the point of the woke right. The point of the woke right is there's more men than there are women. They're more powerful than women. Well, actually, not population-wise, but active in schizopolitics, I would say there's more men than women. In that men can be mobilized in order to retake the power of politics. And so they're using masculine identity for grievance politics in order to motivate that base so they can seize power, not so they can return to some egalitarian liberal norm, but so they can keep and maintain power. And so I don't think it's like this post-ironic adoption of far-left politics in order to point out the absurdity of politics. I think it's actually just the seizure of authoritarian power. I think that is what separates woke right from absurdist right, post-ironic right. Seraph702 says, these influencers are capitalizing on young men with weak values, fears, and fear of missing out to cast them as right-wing knights rather than dudes with mixed morals not belonging anywhere. Well, and that's what I think the power of liberalism is, capital L liberalism. Again, I don't identify as a liberal, meaning that that's like my end-all, be-all philosophy. But the power of liberalism is it tolerates fascists, communists, Christian conservatives, Christian nationalists, liberals, progressives, communists, socialists. All of these people can ultimately function and exist peaceably under the liberal system because the liberal system says, as long as you don't destroy the system, you work a job, you pay your taxes, and you don't commit crimes, you are free to say or believe whatever the hell you want. And that's the power of the capital L liberal system, which I advocate for and I defend for. But I think what there's a conceit that Andrew isn't allowing in his worldview, which is weird because I think he himself is a Christian nationalist, is that I don't think all of the woke right is using left-wing tactics to point out the absurdity of left-wing tactics. I think they're using that to break the game and seize power for themselves. So we can ditch commies. Yeah, for sure. Grassroots. If I could, I would be like a Singaporean style nationalist, which is authoritarian, by the way, but it's authoritarian centrist. They effectively, I don't actually want this. I think it would be lovely sometimes. I like freedom of conscience and freedom of speech too much. So I couldn't really do this. But Singaporean authoritarianism, effectively, they are socially prohibited from talking shit about people's ethnicity, race, or religion. You are legally prohibited. Freedom of speech for everything else, as far as I know, but you can't advocate to destroy the state, and you cannot advocate for racial or religious bigotry. And if you do that, someone with a cane shows up and they beat you and throw you in jail. So do I really want that? Not really. But could I idealize a system in which communists and fascists were beaten and thrown in jail? It could be fun. But of course, when you normalize that treatment for thought crimes, all you're doing is you're normalizing the potential for the state to, take one of your controversial beliefs and then turn that into a crime and then beat you with a stick and throw you in jail. So I think freedom of speech and freedom of conscience is too important to follow that model. It's just a decent fantasy every now and then. Jonah Boy says Tim Pool was very passionate about Singapore in that Econoboy debate. Yeah, dude, I think he was memeing, but yeah, he was like, you can't have a welfare state unless you beat bad people with sticks. And I was like, yeah. I was wrong. I was wrong for doing that, but I had a good time. Old School says, doesn't Singapore give the death penalty for spitting gum on the sidewalk? No, that's a meme, but they do. If you spit gum on the sidewalk, you will get reported, number one, by your fellow citizens. Number two, a cop with a baton will show up and beat you and take you in front of a judge and then force you to like clean up gum for like a year. So yeah.
No, but then they do engage in it. They talk about how white people are oppressed. You just said it, right? White people are oppressed. Identity politics with a hyperfixation on race. This is what the Groper movement is basically all about. White people are victims because of some magical, mystical figure out there, these Jewish controlled fucking space lasers that are, and like Nick Fuentes went on Alex Jones and said, if all Jewish people were transported to the moon, the world's problems would go away, right? You're telling me that that's not a hyper fixation on identity politics and intersectionality?
I think it's a hyper focus on identity politics. I just don't think that any particular group has any pass on hyper focusing on identity politics. Why? So like from your view.
So hold on. Liberals do. Okay. Liberals and libertarians do have a pass on not hyper focusing on identity politics, because liberals and libertarians say, we don't care about your race. We don't care about your ethnicity. We don't care about your religion. We don't care about even your political beliefs. Believe whatever the hell you want to believe, but work a job. Libertarians don't say this, but liberals do. Work your job, pay your taxes, take care of your community, take care of your family. Don't commit crimes that hurt other people and will leave you alone. So liberals and libertarians 100% are not hyperfixated on identity the way that other groups are. So no, I massively disagree with this assessment. How did Singapore become like that? Well, at risk of having another geopolitical rant, I'll keep it very short. They're in a precarious geopolitical situation where they're effectively on the butt of Malaysia. So they have Han Chinese colonists with Malaysian natives that have to work together to maintain a very rich city-state. Some of those people are Muslim, some of them are atheists, some of them are Buddhist, some of them are Christian, all of them are colonists, and they have to all work together to maintain a city-state. Otherwise, it'll collapse. Void a Parrot says, I dislike the Singaporean government so much, it's run by an aimless, neurotic, and cowardly government. That's funny. That's actually the first time that I've heard criticisms of the Singaporean government, but that's probably because of the issues that we identified earlier, where they can identify things that are silly and then beat people for it. Grassroots Hegemon for the 20. Thank you kindly, sir. You are too kind to the channel. Look, when I say I just want to put everyone in prison just in case everyone makes fun of me, where's the problem here? Dude, you're a perfect Singaporean nationalist. You're perfect. And they all hate the Japanese. Well, I mean, that's kind of true in all of Asia because the Japanese did that whole imperialism thing where they slaughtered a bunch of people. But yeah. A Singaporean girl? Good. Biz D. One of my best friends is marrying a Singaporean girl. Cool. I hope she's smart and mean and funny.
View, I have a better word for this, would be reactionary. So these groups all call themselves reactionary. Fuentes and the Gropers call themselves reactionaries. That actually makes sense because if they're saying, look, you're imposing X on us, we're reacting to that by doing by showing you the exact same behavior back and you don't like it.
Bro, exactly. They are doing exactly what you're saying. We are going to act woke against you.
Then that would be reactionary, not woke right.
So we're saying
Yeah, I was about to say the descriptive phenomena is identical.
the same.
No, they're not holding the same set of beliefs. That's the delineation. So here, let me.
But they're using the same tactics in order to achieve different beliefs. That's actually the whole point of the term woke right. The right wing obviously wants something different. Some of them are Christian nationalists. They want a Christian theocracy. Some of them are race realists. They want a white supremacist or a white segregationist society. That's a substantive part of the woke right. They want to use the tools of the leftists and the progressive left in order to achieve right-wing aims, but they're using the same tools. That's actually exactly what James Lindsay was describing.
Maybe I can do it in an analogy.
But you just said that you just said the woke left is one
using the restroom. Be right back.
Class over the other. What the Groper
racial categorized victim classes, which need to have grievances which they don't even have addressed.
Then you have that on both sides.
No, you don't. You actually really don't. So the idea of racial grievance really only comes in as a form of internal critiques. What I'm trying to explain to you. So, like, let's pretend for a second you had a prison where the prisoners didn't want to eat shit. But every single day, the prison guards put a piece of shit on their plate, right? And said, you have to eat it. One day, the prisoners riot and they take it over. The next day, right, they force the prison guards to eat shit. The prison guards are like, fuck, I really don't like this. And they're like, see, yeah, that sucks, doesn't it? Right? The prisoners themselves are not adopting the ideology that you should eat shit. That was the ideology of the guards. They're just showing the problems in the presentation. That's the same exact thing you would do against any proponents of your ideology who tried to force it on you as a form of protest.
Well, then the argument for the woke left would be we were treated poorly under slavery and we're reactionary. So
they consider themselves the opposite. They consider themselves to be progressive, not reactionary, non-reactionary. So they're progressing by using intersectionality. The right wing is reacting to the quote progress by holding up a mirror and saying, look, if it is the case that you want to make everything intersectional and break down every single people group and this and that, that also can be utilized in our favor against you. But it does not mean that that's a core of their ideology, because it's not. No, it's a weapon.
Yeah, no, it's a never-ending cycle, because it's basically somebody is always going to come back in this reactionary thing. The left is going to say we're progressive, not reactionary, but we're reacting to. Well,
they're not. They're never reactionary. That's why they don't call themselves that.
No, the main tenet of the woke left is reaction.
Bro, they hold all institutional power. What are they reacting to?
If I can add in,
and they also don't hold all institutional power. The Trump movement. What do they have? Don't the Republicans right now have a trifecta? Yeah, don't they hold all institutional power right now? They might not control the media, but who controls the House? It's the Republicans. Who controls the Senate? It's Republicans again. I almost guarantee it. Republicans. So they have a trifecta of power. So saying that the left has all institutional power, that might have been true during the Obama years. You could even make some argument that it might have been true during like the early Biden presidency, but that's just not true right now. So anyways, I feel like Andrew Wilson's being obtuse. He's effectively arguing, like, descriptively, I understand exactly what you're saying, but it's not the word, you know? And it's like, okay, yeah, but the deep state, bro. And the deep state isn't progressive either. It's like mildly conservative. They might be liberal Democrats or they might be rhino Republicans. But the deep state, the people who want to perpetuate the State Department and the Department of Defense and all that kind of stuff, they're institutionalists. They're not like revolutionaries. So they are the thing against which you would be progressive. Void of Parrot says, thank God genetic engineering is becoming viable. Can't wait to make elves. Dude, I can't wait to have CRISPR babies that don't have to have these kind of debates on the internet. We need to elevate. We have 3,000 IQ. They have 80 IQ. So we need to have 3,000 IQ debates. They arguably control corporate media. I agree with that. They have a conservative majority at the Supreme Court as well. Right. Dude, conservatives are dominating right now. And here we are seeing two arslers in their native habitat. I disagree and disavow your ableist language, Azurai. I love ableist language. I just have to, deny loving it. You can call Obama progressive, but it was mostly a virtue signal. Agreed. Obama ended up being like a very normie Democrat, in my opinion. Obviously, the ACA was very ambitious, but it was effectively like a pretty milquetoast centrist Democrat attempt at universal access to healthcare. They're infinitely more progressive and leftist programs than the ACA. Conservative liberalism says they're talking about progressive policies that we exist in, not what the current makeup of DC is. Think affirmative action, DEI policies. Maybe you can argue that there's vast swaths of the culture, but he just used the word institutional power. If that's what he's arguing, I can accept it. It's fine. It's fine. Grassroots Hegemon says Andrew Wilson and I are holding it down for chain smokers. Oh God, please quit. Please quit so you don't die early. Conservative liberalism says Sandra Day O'Connor, when ruling in affirmative action decades ago, acknowledged it's illiberal but accepted it as a needed temporary correction. Interesting. All right.
And I think the question is whether the woke right exists or not, but I don't know if it matters whether it's right or not in terms of the reactionary versus not reactionary identification.
Yeah, I mean, it matters, and here's why it matters. When we're talking about if I said, so here's what Misfit Patriot's doing. It's a word categorization fallacy. And here's what's going on. If I say no to a trans person, you can't be a woman. They say, no, you're saying I don't exist. You're trying to erase my identity, right? You're trying to erase who I am because you claim that that's not what it is. Here, I'm doing the same type of criticism. I'm saying, no, what you're pointing to as being the woke right, as a behavioral set, actually here doesn't make any sense. The word reactionary in its place would actually make sense. It would be reacting to things which are pushed on them rather than adopting this ideology as being one that's correct. So if these guys got power, they're not going to impose intersectionality. That's ridiculous.
That's what
it's not their ideology.
They argue for white. There's a lot of white nationalism, hyperfixation.
That's not intersectionality.
Yeah, no shit. I feel like he's being obtuse. So Jordan Peterson and James Lindsay called out that there are Machiavellian people who speak words that they don't mean in order to achieve results. Psychopathic, meaning they don't empathize with other people. They're narcissistic, so they're self-obsessed. And they're sadistic, so they vicariously enjoy the pain of others. Okay? That's what they pointed to as being woke right, is these psychopaths who have infected the right and have made it worse and are effectively, they don't care about the ideology insofar as they care about the achieving power. Ideology versus power game, the game within the game. That's some content that we watched earlier. Not today, but in general, we watched it. And then what Misfit Patriot has said today, which I think is accurate, is that the woke right, quote unquote, uses identity politics, a victim mentality, and moral absolutism and tribalism in order to shore up a base. And then they emphasize revolution versus reform. Well, there's obviously different people in different groups, but the Gropers and a healthy chunk of Christian nationalists are 100% revolutionary. And then also the same thing with white nationalists. Even if they say, oh, yeah, the overarching liberal libertarian society of the United States can remain, they want to revolutionize the way that Americans conceptualize race relations so they can create, they can resegregate. So I would 100% think that this is a decent definition in order to encapsulate Christian theocrats and white identitarians. So, you know, Andrew acting like, oh, they're all just doing this as a shitpost. They're all just doing this in order to point out the absurdity of progressivism. I think he's ignoring what's actually being described. Excuse me. Conserve liberalism. Madam Power says, conservatives ensure the demise of democracy by putting all efforts into elevating and rewarding white Christian nationalists. We've already been through this before, Madam Power. I'm not saying you and me, but I'm saying that in the 90s, there was a Christian revivalism. In the early 20th century, there was like the neo-Confederate movement. In the 1860s, we had a civil war. You know, there are plenty of things that have threatened our republic. And I do think that we are in a politically fraught moment. We're in a dangerous political moment, but we have survived worse in the past. Derek says they have more influence over social media companies and more views, way more cable news, more AM. Yeah, but that's funny is alt media. Dude, I talked to some legacy media people the other day. Legacy media people are like shitting bricks because alternative media, there's so much content and there's so many popular creators. And some of these popular creators blow the numbers off of like mainstream news routinely. Like what's a mainstream news program? Let's take a look at it. Most popular mainstream news programs. So let's just go for the number one. Fox News, The Five, 4.5 million viewers. Jesse Waters Prime Time, 4 million viewers, 3.5 million viewers. These are not live viewers, by the way. These are post-recorded viewers. All right. And then we look at Hassan Piker, who is one of the biggest politics commentators on the space. And Hassan Piker, if you're going off the pre-recorded viewers, he has 1.6 million. Sometimes he'll have like, 20,000, 30,000 live, but he'll have, what will he have? He will have 100,000 during a large drama. And then if you look at what he posts, 100K, 552, 273, 100, 186, 148, 128, 175, 184, 857, 274, 129, 222, 297, 336. So these numbers actually, believe it or not, are not that impressive. These are the kind of numbers that Vosh and Destiny get. But that's the point, is that these are a-holes with webcams who just say their opinions for a few hours a day, and they're getting a few 100,000 views. And so they're competing with legacy media. Legacy media actually hates this. Derek says Fox is so dominant, and yet it gets such a huge pass when someone says MSM or corporate media, unless it's to both sides. True. Madam Power says Fox is dominant because the Federalist Society embraced Rupert Murdoch, and since then, the GOP made sure Fox dominates the airwaves for decades, I guess. Sacred Snow says, do you think Andrew would make the same argument if the left did the lib and learn scared straight for Dem norms, or do you think he would just call it authoritarian because I think he would just call it authoritarian. No, I don't think that he would view authoritarian as a criticism. He would be like, yeah, it's authoritarian, now what? Do that one with Scott Jennings, maybe? Sure. What show does Scott Jennings run? What show is Scott Jennings on? Why is that not popping up instantaneously? God, I hate Scott Jennings too. What show is this?
The president of El Salvador also tweeted.
Who's this lady? Why don't you put the title of the show somewhere on here, lady? Fox is extremely dominant. The only mainstream channel I watch is PBS. When Chris Licht was fired, can't Fox many opinions. NPR is a big one too. Murdoch, blah, 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 blah. It's some CNN panel. Dude, it should be Abby Phillips' show. Okay, let's take a look. So, sorry for the segment, but I think this is important. Phillips' show. Ratings. Cancel. The show had 165,000 demo viewers on March 11th. Okay, so I don't know if 163,000 is live or if that's post-recorded. But if it's post-recorded, views, then we have alternative media pundits who are competing. That's the main point. Sorry for going on a yap, but I just wanted to show you.
Yeah, no, that's not intersectionality.
Well, so let me ask you a question, just so we can sort of put a button on this.
Yeah.
Does woke exist, right? Because you said woke left exists, right?
Yes, woke left exists. Well, here, let's go through it. We'll go through it. We'll go through it. Intersectionality emphasizes social categories are not isolated, but interconnected, influencing each other, shaping person's overall experience. These intersecting identities can create overlapping systems of discrimination, disadvantage, leading to unique forms of marginalization and oppression. Intersectionality also considers the broader societal structures, political systems, and contributions to inequality and discrimination. Remember, equity is the core point of wokeism, equity. This is something that's categorically rejected by the right and the Christian right. The idea of equity, the idea of egalitarianism itself is now rejected by the left. Even now they say it's equity. So they frame it like this. There's never going to be people who are exactly the same height. So if you're trying to look over a fence and they're trying to look over a fence, they're going to have an advantage, right? Equity is about putting a box under them so that they can stand on the box and also look over the fence. That is the basis for intersectionality. That is completely rejected by not only Fuentes and the Gropers, but it's rejected by all of what you would consider the dissident right. No. They don't want a box under them so that they can be equal or have equity with some other social group. They're actually demanding the opposite. They're saying, look, we already are looking over the fence. We don't need any of this shit. You're just trying to steal fucking everything we have. That's what they're saying.
No, what they're saying is they want all the flipping boxes. I don't agree with this. When it comes to the equity, there's an art piece. Let's take a look at this. Equity fence art. So this is equality. Everybody gets a box so they can look, but if you're short, this would be like a disabled person or whatever. You still can't see the game. This person can barely see the game. This person can see the game just fine. All right. Equity means that everybody gets a shot at what you're looking at because you distribute resources in order to make sure that everybody has a shot at it. This is what the Christian nationalists advocate for, because they say in the equality view set of America, we're giving away our boxes to people who don't deserve it. And then in the equity version of America, this person is more privileged than me because they get 2 boxes to stand on. Whereas I should keep as many boxes as I possibly can produce. And I don't give a shit if this person or this person have the capacity to barely see the goods of society or equitably see the goods of society. They say, fudge them, right? And so what I would say is I'm an equality guy, all right? I'm an equality guy because I want everybody to be productive. But what I would do is if I was this guy, is I would just pick up this little man. This little man wants to see the game. I want to help him out. You know, I would pick him up. With equity, I think the reason why we don't like this, or right-wingers don't like this, is because it can vilify just normal dudes who are socially productive. It vilifies them and tells them that they're not entitled to anything. Effectively, they exist to be productive for other people. And of course, what ends up happening is when you vilify a class of person and you tell them that what they really need to be doing is just working thanklessly in order to provide for other people, they're going to quit. It doesn't work with the self-interested motivations of human psychology. And so I want to work. I want to get results for my work. I want to be able to access the good thing. And if I see people who are disadvantaged, I want to help them see that too, but I want to do so on a semi-voluntary basis. This sucks, and this sucks even worse. So, I mean, it's good for me, but it's not good for society. Because what will happen eventually, taking a look at your screen, what happens eventually in societies that are structured this way, that the Christian nationalists are arguing for, where you seize all of the benefits for yourself and you say fudge them to the disadvantaged in society, is the disadvantaged in society eventually resent your position, and so they kick your boxes, so you fall off your boxes and you break your neck. So this is bad because you're going to cause these people to rebel and kill you. This is bad because you're disincentivizing productive people. This could be good, but you need to help a bro out. That's my argumentation. And I'm fundamentally correct, and I have a 3,000 IQ because I'm on the Counterpoint stream. Grassroots Hegemon says, Piker stream generates way more views than his myriads of clip and rip YouTube channels. He's a piece of garbage, but he gets traffic on Twitch. 100%. What about U.S. manufacturers of what? Deporting immigrants is supposed to help give natives an equity boost? Yeah, but I don't think it's going to. And on top of that, we're going to end up causing product shortages and cost increases, particularly in construction and agriculture, which I think is absurd. Like and share pro-democracy community, says Yakov Eshraze. True. Equity is so r-slurred. I have no idea why the left thought it was anywhere near reasonable of a position. Well, it's because they sympathize with the people who are at the bottom of society, and they want them to do well. Azarai says, did you see that Helldivers 2 added weapon customization? I did, but I don't have time. I don't have time to go into like a 20-minute kill flow grind set. I just don't have time for those kinds of video games. I really wish I did, but I don't. What does picking up the other person abstractly represent to you? The boxes are resources. That's the energy you use to pick them up. Yeah, kind of. What I would say, what is picking up the other person? I would say being a good member of your community, right? So if you see somebody who's struggling in order to achieve the good things in life, you go out of your way to help them out. That's what I would say it would be metaphorically. Derek says, yeah, I meant to give examples of where the right does do equity motivated policies with tariffs and deportations. Well, that's the thing, Derek. There's a lot of, I would argue that the woke right is distancing itself from the traditional right because, well, not the traditional right. That's the wrong term. Normie right is distancing itself from the normie right because the normie right used to have pro-capitalist argumentation. It used to have pro-liberal argumentation. And it's doing a really bad job fighting the woke right. It's something that I've been doing for years with very limited success. So, yeah, I agree with you that the woke right does do equity-motivated policies towards whites and Christians, 100%. That's actually the complaint. That's Misfit Patriot's complaint. Sacred Snow says, yeah, but what if one of those boxes is... one of those boxes in the tall stacks is nukes via la dystopian revolution, potentially. There aren't enough people in America to make all the things Americans want. Nowhere near. Agreed. Thank you for the donation, Yakov. Valor Media Network, keep going. Thank you kindly, King. Thank you kindly for the donation. I don't believe lefties are talking about social safety nets when they're talking about equitable outcomes. They're not. They're not. You don't, you know, this might be, far be it for me to say it on a Democrat-funded channel, but I am obviously a never Trump Republican. I think that when it comes to equity, it's a Gramscian, Gramsci, march through academia where they're trying to normalize far left-wing perspectives on society through cultural argumentation. You can call me a conspiracy theorist, but I do believe that. Gravity says, I think the primary issue with that, we can theoretically enforce equal distribution of physical boxes. We can't enforce people to be good. It's true. It is true. And any system you create has to factor in the inherent selfishness and evil of humanity. And if you don't do that, you're setting yourself up for failure. Anyways, back to the content.
right? It's the opposite.
Yeah, unfortunately though, they're just like the left and making it up, right? They're saying the problem is Jewish supremacy. We are oppressed. We need, even though they don't use the word equity, we want equality with the people who control.
No, they're
our
not demanding
lives.
equality. It's none of their tenets are about equality or equity.
They are.
Their
right?
tenets are actually the opposite. They're like, no two people are ever going to be equal. There's never going to be any such thing as equity. They don't demand equity ever. None of them.
Do they focus on a disadvantage that they have under
political disadvantages are not what equity means. Equity is a categorization of
multiple forms of race, multiple forms of oppression, multiple forms of oppression, disadvantage, such as race, gender.
Yeah, but where's the equity that they're demanding? What equity are they demanding?
They don't use the word equity but
because they're not demanding it. The whole point of intersectionality is for equity.
They want the people who are that they are disadvantaged against, right?
No,
they want those people to be out of power.
No, they're saying this. They're saying, I can already see over the fence, right? I'm not going to let you cut my legs off so that you can see over the fence too. That's the opposite of equity. What the left wants is equity, where they take a piece off of you so that some social group can also see over the fence. The right and dissonant right categorically reject that. They reject equity completely. That's the merit of intersectionality, is equity. Otherwise, what's the point of it? Like, let me ask you directly. What would the point of intersectionality be if the left wasn't fighting for equity? What would it be?
So you're saying the only tenet of woke is intersectionality?
No. I'm not saying it's the only tenet. We could throw in things like LGBTQ and things, but it's always going to reduce to equity. The idea is always about equity.
So hold on. This is it's like a category error, if I remember correctly. But anyways, this is what Andrew Wilson is pointing out, is that oftentimes, especially on the right, it's perceived that equality. Okay, so this would be like the liberal capitalist free society that we, relatively speaking, live in. Although this, I think, representatively, this would be with like minor taxation or no taxation if you're to take it in a metaphorical sense. Then equity would be a more like socialistic perspective, where you make sure that this person has what they need and this person, has what they need, and this person doesn't need anything. That's the kind of social resentment I was talking about earlier. Equity in reality, saws getting cut off, has cut these people in half or cut off their legs. That's kind of where we look at socialist dystopias like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, or Maoist China in the early 20th century or middle 20th century, or we look at Soviet Russia during the revolution. And it's not this like what communists and socialists sell is this, but what they deliver is this, right? That's the right-wing argument.
So the entire woke movement is about equity.
That's what the left-wing view would be equity. The idea of having some type of like artificial lift.
Andrew Paris says, I think the real position of moderate Dems isn't full equity, just a baseline of outcomes with ample opportunity to overperform. I agree, Andrew Paris, and this is actually the split between Ethan Klein and Hassan Piker. Hassan Piker is a socialist, so he argues for equity all the time, whereas Ethan Klein, I think, is a moderate Democrat, and so he's vaguely pro-capitalist. He does believe in redistributive economics and a progressive tax structure. That way, like, really rich people get taxed at a very high level so they can amply provide not just for themselves, but for the community at large. But that is a very real economic and social position difference between leftists and liberals. So, yeah. Something about the Jews, the equity, the far right obsesses about. Well, dude, but so this is the category error that I think Andrew Wilson is engaged in. The criticism of woke right doesn't have anything to do with outcome. We can all acknowledge that the right wing and the left wing want different things. That's not the point of the term woke right. The point of the term woke right is to point out that there are nefarious factions of the right wing that have grifting psychopaths that are a part of it, who reject the former moderate normie right wing, and they use the tactics of the far left in order to pursue nefarious ends. It's not the fact that the ends are identical, which is what Andrew Wilson is arguing, and Misfit Patriot is not coherent enough to point out. They're arguing that the tactics are the same, and they're equally nefarious. We need a participation box for the tall guy so he doesn't feel excluded. Well, dude, unironically, that's what I argued. I said is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? Is a man not entitled to the height of his box? You know what I'm saying? This is why abundance Dems are based. Yeah, because don't abundance Dems effectively say, let's unleash the economy as aggressively as possible and invest in tech and R&D so we can create such a rich economy that nobody gives a shit about welfare programs because we're all so flippin' rich? I don't know if that's the actual position of abundance Dems, but if that's their argument, I think it's the right attitude. Seraph702 says, I argue the tall guy gave his box to the little person because he didn't need it and he's going to get it back after the game. Yeah, but that's a little commie of you. The white right gets a box from birth. Well, then that you have the Madam Power. I'm not saying this to be criticizing. I'm saying this to be descriptive. The right wing would argue that you are bigoted against white Christians because you presume their privilege. So anyways, Jonah Boy says, I want to edit of that equity comic where there's a panel that says real equity and they're all being eaten by the Tyranids. Sounds like Gene Stealer cult propaganda, but I can't say I wouldn't appreciate the meme. Anyways, continuing with the content.
That is at the expense of some other group. This is what the dissident right and the right wing categorically dismiss and reject as being no good. Same thing as you. You would reject the exact same ideology. Say that's no good. Fuck your equity. Sorry about the size of your box, but you don't get to take my leg to see over the same fence, right? You would say the same shit.
Don't you think that the woke right, which I would say that they would have more of a view under your own acknowledgement towards the founders and the framework, where the founders focused on equity, right? Where it's like
the founders never focused on equity.
Well,
the opposite.
All men. Hold on. What does all men created equal mean?
Equality is not equity. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but what the left is after is they're after egalitarianism with equity. But so that would not be equality the way that you and I view it. They would say that we already have equality of opportunity, right? But some people need an artificial lift up so that they can somehow compete with the rest of planet Earth. That would be the equity that they're after. Not egalitarianism in the sense of the law, but equity in the sense of taking from this group to give it to themselves so that they feel like they can be artificially empowered to meet whatever the demands are of said group that they want to be part of.
Okay, so I understand your argument of woke left. I think that a lot of people would at least acknowledge that there are similarities between the two groups, right?
Yeah, but if I reduce it to what it actually is, equity.
If you reduce.
All right. Hold on. So let's check in with Grassroots Hegemon for $5. Everything would be fine if we had a public social wealth fund channeled entirely through super chats. Well, considering that I have a dozen super chats and like 8 of them are yours, I agree. Seraph says, if I was a commie, the boxes go back to the government. I was being a socialist. Listen, I say this all the time just because I spent 2 or 3 years hanging out with lefties. Socialism is a decommodification of basic human need, meaning that food, water, and shelter are guaranteed by society. And then it's also the ownership of the means of production, the public ownership of the means of production, which means that I think the most capitalist argument would be that when you work for a company, you get a stock share of that company, so you have partial ownership, so you can determine what happens in the business. That's the way that a lot of socialists argue for quote unquote socialism. There's of course way more authoritarian versions of it. When it comes to communism, in a Marxist definition, it's a moneyless, classless, stateless society. So there's no state. I don't know what the hell that means, frankly. No governance sounds insane to me. But it's moneyless because everything is so abundant. You have access to so many things that you don't even need money for exchange. You can actually just go pick up goods because they're just produced so abundantly that you can do it. Moneyless, stateless, classless. There's no division between the bourgeois, the people who own businesses, and the proletariat, the people who work in those businesses, because that class system has been abolished. So everyone works, everyone eats, everyone has everything they need and everyone has access to all the goods of society. And I think that the amount of this, you're right, though, that what Marxists argue, Marxist-Leninists in particular, is that the proletariat is too stupid to realize that that would be good. And so you need a revolutionary authoritarian government to implement socialism and then communism. That's how the Soviet Union was. That's how Maoist China was. And it was evil as hell. Sacred Snow says Gene Stealer cult propaganda is actually all the cheap army builds for Gene Stealer cult videos. True. Super chats and YouTube merch based economy. Well, I mean, listen, if we reach post scarcity America, everybody's going to be a YouTuber and everybody's going to be a streamer. The boxes could be labeled as surplus biomass. True. Commander Haircut says, I hate this so much. There's so much intellectual dishonesty happening right now, and it makes me want to vomit. Well, welcome aboard to Twitch and YouTube politics, brother. Look, I'm waiting for my software to install, okay? All right, based. Gravity says, to say white Christians aren't born with privilege in America is crazy. We have a Gestapo rounding up brown people and deporting them to forever detention camps. Now watch us introducing South Africans. Sure. It's not whether or not we have privilege, Gravity. That's not the argument, okay? So when it comes to white Christian privilege, the privilege is that when I was born and raised Christian, I had active communities that I could be a part of, and nobody treated me like a freak, right? Whereas if you're Hindu or Buddhist or atheist or Muslim or Jew, then some people are going to treat you like a freak just for practicing your religion or lack of religion, right? Then when it comes to white, I was born in the late 80s and immigration had started in 65, like really aggressively from Central and South America. So my entire life, my ethno-religious group has been in the majority in this country, and our position was the default within culture and media. So I've enjoyed massive amounts of cultural and media my entire life, and it's been awesome. And then I also, my perspective was the default within the United States. Again, it's awesome. I love it. I love my privilege. However, what white Christian males get pissed off about is that I was raised in a disciplined household. I was taught social and conservative and fiscal conservative perspectives. I've had a job since I was 15. I enlisted in the Marine Corps and got the shit kicked out of me. I got out and I had to work full time in order to put myself through college. I joined law enforcement, which was another really tough, stressful job. I've dealt with the dregs of society, and some of the dregs of society but deserve to be there because they're pieces of garbage, right? They're actually like terrible human beings. And so when you argue that I am privileged, which I understand privilege enough to acknowledge that I have privilege, what a lot of white people hear is that they don't have problems. That wasn't true of me as a kid. I had problems when I was a teenager. I had problems when I was an adult. I had problems. And so when you argue with white people about whether or not they have privileges, they hear privileged. And that is particularly insulting to working class and middle class Americans who have to bust ass in order to survive. So I'm not saying that you're not descriptively correct, but I would say that the right wing has had it in their mind that they have been beaten with this privilege stick for a decade and a half, and they're fudging sick of it, right? Exactly. Connor has base Chad centrist privilege. It's true. My life is better because I understand a lot of arguments. It's true. I have a decent life. I have a good life. Everyone just sell each other hats and it'll be chill, bro. Don't worry about it. I'll trade you a hat for a hat. So true. What I want to do is I want to allow them to make their next lines of argument. And if we dig into something deeper, then I am going to allow the content to flow. If, however, they kind of loop on, well, descriptively, woke right and woke left are the same in reference to tactics, but prescriptively, what they want, the outcome they want are different. Therefore, the woke right doesn't exist. If we loop on that point again, I'm going to move on to Sargon of Akkad because I feel like they've looped on this like 2 or 3 times. Ironside, the problem isn't the concept so much as R slurs arguing about it with other R slurs. Yeah, like when you see people on Twitter, and I don't know if they were troll accounts or not, but they were taking photos of homeless people, and it was black accounts, black profile pictures, and they were taking pictures of homeless people who are probably schizophrenic, and they're saying, bro, how did you even lose at life? You were born with privilege, right? and they take that picture and they post it to Twitter and they get tens of thousands of likes. That did more damage to the argumentation of privilege or psychology or intersectionality. That did more damage to that line of argumentation than anything else. Assuming that people born white just instantaneously are like millionaires and their life is on easy mode, it's incorrect. It's a good joke. It's not correct. Big in Gaming says those coal miners in West Virginia really have been told they're privileged by people living in California. Yeah, exactly. People in rural Appalachia who get told that they're privileged, they effectively want to throw a Molotov cocktail at your head, right? Don't tell rural working class people that they're privileged or they will fist fight you. Pachydermis Absurdus says, privilege sounds like Thurston Howell III. I've always thought advantage might be a better messaging. Advantage is 100% a better word. If we talked about advantages instead of privileges, because privileges sounds unearned. That's what that sounds like. I'm going to look it up. Privilege definition. A special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. I think that while it's not necessarily a part of the definition, I think privilege sounds unearned, whereas advantage could be earned or unearned, right? Stopping a loop is a prerequisite for debate moderating. Please, Tomato. True. That shit sounds like Russian propaganda. It might be. Sargon is a weird case. He used to be strictly anti-IDPOL. It's what the whole Kekistan thing was about. Since then, he's become an Anglo-supremacist, which is a decision. Yeah, true. And that's why it's funny to me, because Sargon of Akkad is 100% woke right. So him declaring premature victory over the concept, I think, is hilarious. But let's give them an opportunity not to loop, and then we'll move to Sargon if we need to.
It to what it actually is. Right now, I think what I'm trying to say, and I think that what a lot of people are trying to say is, okay, this is the woke right is there's a duck, right? And the duck is the woke left. The woke right is walking like the duck. It's talking like the duck. It's quacking like the fucking duck.
True.
And we're going, hey, that looks like a fucking duck.
Yeah,
right?
but
that's what we're doing.
I understand what you're saying, but it doesn't make, again, I've reduced this already so you can see it a million times. They're not actually quacking like the duck. What they're doing is they're rejecting the ideology of equity and inclusion, both of these tenets.
Woke right is just trans.
All right, I'm good. I gave them an opportunity. They're still continuing on the same loop. I think that Andrew is smarter than this, so I think that he could see what this guy is saying if he wanted to, but you know, he's a debate bro. He likes to dunk, so it's not that big of a deal. Misfit Patriot is arguing that I'm going to do a summary and then wrap up this segment and then move into the next one. Actually, let me start with James Lindsay. James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson argued that there are people who have dark tetrad personality traits. They're Machiavellian, they're psychopathic, they're narcissistic, and sadistic. Machiavellian means you don't say what you actually believe, you say what you think is going to get you the desired outcome. Psychopathic means that they do not empathize with others. Narcissistic means that they're self-obsessed. Sadistic means that they enjoy the pain of others, okay? So they said that there are people in the right wing who have these attributes and they are capitalizing and grifting and they're playing a power game where there's the ideology and the points that it advocates for, like fiscal conservatism, social conservatism, Burkean conservatism. They all have things that they want to see in the world, and that's the goal of a tribal political group. But there's also the power game of climbing up the social hierarchy. And a lot of woke right psychopaths are not worried about the ideology. They're just playing the power game to climb to the top. By the way, the fact that they never mentioned Donald Trump in this conversation is insane to me, but I do understand that they don't want to alarm their base. But they're actually describing Donald Trump the entire time in the past decade of right-wing politics. They just refuse to admit that it's their dear leader who's doing it. What Misfit Patriot, I think, correctly argues. Oh, and then further, James Lindsay says that the woke right uses the tactics of the woke left for their own nefarious ends. All the things that you criticize the woke left for. Misfit Patriot in this debate said that identity politics, centering identity, a victim mentality, moral absolutism, I'm going to add, and tribalism and revolution versus reform, I hear this rhetoric coming out of extremist right-wing factions, namely the Gropers, who are Christian nationalists, and also the white identitarians. I hear this rhetoric coming out of their camp all of the time. So I think that James Lindsay and Misfit Patriot, while he didn't argue these points particularly well in this debate, I think they're just fundamentally correct. So Andrew Wilson doesn't want to acknowledge that this is what's happening because it will segregate normie conservatives from psycho conservatives, and it will segregate normie right from woke right. And so it will overall weaken the right wing if this line of argumentation succeeds. End of yap, end of rant, end of summary. Okay. Let's pull up the next one. Sargon of Akkad, woke right.